Okay, Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to the third ISKCON Communications Conference online. Begin with offering our respectful obeisances to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Picharnane Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschachari Zatarnane. And Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivedanta. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. And obeisance to all of you. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So my name is Anuttama Das. I'm the currently serving as the Global Minister of Communications for ISKCON, and really happy to see so many devotees here to attend our conference today. Exploring our topic is a really relevant one considering the dynamics in the world, and ISKCON is oftentimes reflects what's going on in the world, looking at exploring unity and diversity. Very important topic. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our two hosts, and then they will be introducing our guest speakers today. We're really grateful for the three guest speakers that are here. Our two hosts are Managopal Prabhu and his partner, his wife, Manasi Ganga. They are both leaders in the New Jersey temple in North America. There's currently building a new, beautiful, multi-million-dollar temple there. They're very active in that. They're both professional people. Managopal is involved in IT, and Manasi is a former teacher currently working in the banking industry. They're both leaders in our communications global team. Managopal is the North American co-director of communications, and Manasi is also a member of our team and also very active in the Child Protection Office and teams in North America. They do a lot of service together, which makes it very convenient that they're married. So we also should mention that communication ministry, we're strong supporters of Grahasta Ashram. We have many wonderful examples of devotees that are doing communications who are in the Grahasta Ashram. Sometimes it actually helps. They also have one son, Madhava, who is in a medical school at my alma mater, Michigan State University. Go Spartans, Ki Jai. And they've really been a wonderful source of inspiration and leadership for our team. So my role at this part of the conference is just to introduce them. And again, welcome all of you. So I'll turn it over to Managopal and Manasi Ganga. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Anuttama Prabhu, and thank you to devotees. So welcome to the third International Online ISKCON Communications Conference. We are grateful to all of you who have taken the time to enthusiastically join us in this important initiative of the global communications community of ISKCON. We really hope that you will enjoy it and that you'll find it valuable. Baldev Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Un placer estar con ustedes. Bienvenidos a la tercera Conferencia Internacional de Comunicaciones en Línea de ISKCON. Agradecemos a todos los Vaishnavas que se han tomado el tiempo de unirse con entusiasmo a nosotros en esta importante iniciativa de la comunidad de comunicaciones globales de ISKCON. Esperamos que lo disfruten y lo encuentren valioso. También queremos agradecer a Bhakta Benjamín y a Banamali Prabhu por el servicio que están haciendo de traducción simultánea al español de esta conferencia, que ustedes podrán ver en la página de Facebook de ISKCON Noticias. Gracias. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. तीसरे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय ऑनलाइन ISKCON संचार सम्मेलन में आप सभी का स्वागत है। हम आप सभी के आभारी हैं जिन्होंने ग्लोबल ISKCON कम्युनिकेशन समुदाय के इस महत्वपूर्ण पहल में उत्साहपूर्वक हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए समय निकाला है। हमें उम्मीद है कि आप इसका आनंद लेंगे और इसे मूल्यवान पाएंगे। हरे कृष्णा। So on our agenda, we have some of the most sought after speakers in the world of ISKCON today. We will be starting off with Unity in Diversity by His Holiness Bhanu Swami. He is the chairman of GBC Executive Committee, followed by Unity in Diversity as exemplified by Srila Prabhupada, by Her Grace Vishakha Devi Dasi. President of the Bhaktivedanta Manor. We will then hear about unity and diversity culturally in ISKCON today by His Grace Vraja Vihari Dasa of ISKCON Resolve, and then communications as an enabler for unity and diversity by His Grace Anuttama Das, the Global Minister of ISKCON Communications.
Thank you very much, Mansi Ganga. So we will be shifting around a little bit of our agenda. It appears that we're still waiting for His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj to join us. So we would like to request Her Grace Vishakha Devi Dasi to come next. So maybe I can ask Mansi Ganga if you could introduce Her Grace Vishakha Devi Dasi, and then we can get started, if that's okay.
Yes, sure. So Her Grace Vishakha Devi Dasi, Hare Krishna Mataji, welcome. One of the early disciples of Srila Prabhupada. She is the one who interacted with him directly on numerous occasions. She is one and not only world-renowned as Srila Prabhupada's photographer and filmmaker, but also an accomplished writer and leader of one of the biggest ISKCON communities in the West, the Bhaktivedanta Manor. Interesting fact is she took the ISKCON communications course right after becoming the president of the manor. We thank her for taking time away from the meetings with monarchs, the prime ministers, to be with us today. Thank you and welcome. Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvise Sasunyavadi Paskyantate Shatane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivedanta Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakopa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today. I'm very honored to be in such illustrious company. And when I first heard the topic, unity and diversity in relation to Srila Prabhupada, I thought that I really wasn't the right person to cover this topic. Because as a photographer, I wasn't integral to Prabhupada's management style and his way of dealing with devotees. But then I thought that perhaps I can study Srila Prabhupada's techniques for unity and diversity by studying how he dealt with one particular individual. Taking the example, Prabhupada says, if you want to know if a pot of rice is cooked, you test one grain, and from that grain, you can understand what the other grains are. So with that thought, I studied Prabhupada's letters in relation to one person, and that person was Hansadutta Das Adhikari. He also became a sannyasi. Prabhupada wrote almost 150 letters to Hansadutta in the course of about 10 years. And of course, innumerable conversations. But I thought we could get a real understanding from this particular individual who was quite active, very intelligent, very capable, and also a bit of a maverick, if I may say so. So I have some excerpts from his letters here. We can just take a look at that. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay. So Hansadutta became a devotee very early, 1967. And in those early years, Prabhupada wrote many letters of encouragement to him. And we have one quote here. Your appreciation of my spiritual master is very commendable. I just take a little excerpts from these letters to give a taste of how Prabhupada established a relationship of both encouragement and appreciation for Hansadutta. He also would coach Hansadutta when it was called for. Hansadutta sometimes became restless, sometimes disturbed by different challenges that he faced personally and in terms with his dealings with others. So here in this letter from 69, it is very good if you can chant 64 rounds. This is very nice if you can do it. But first of all, we should not be disturbed by any circumstances. So we have kind of a appreciation, encouragement, and also coaching combined here. So I think the idea of unity and diversity, it's important to establish positive relationships with the people that we're trying to become unified with, rather than some kind of autocratic situation. And also Prabhupada very much emphasized, as he did with all his disciples, the importance of grasping on a daily basis the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and how that will elevate our consciousness. So in this letter from 72, I want you leaders especially to become very much absorbed in the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, and become yourselves completely convinced and free from all doubt. On this platform, you shall be able to carry on the work satisfactorily. But if there is a lack of knowledge or if there is forgetfulness, everything will be spoiled in time. So here, such an instructive couple of sentences, and so important for becoming unified on a solid basis rather than sentiment or whim. But Prabhupada also, as we know, was very sensitive to our own mentality. So many people have said in Prabhupada's presence, they felt very revealed, that he could see past many layers. So also in his letters to Hansadutta, he recognizes Hansadutta's psychological situation, that he's restless, he's capable, he's intelligent, he likes to do big things. So if he's not given the opportunity, he becomes restless. And then we come to this idea of differences and how to deal with them. And Prabhupada had a very broad palette of how to deal with differences. So we'll go through them, at least some of them. Here in this instance, another letter to Hansadutta, Prabhupada himself doesn't make a decision, and he encourages the devotees among themselves to come to some conclusion and send that conclusion to him. So here he's encouraging us to thrash out the problem and try ourselves to find this unity and diversity. He also encourages very much democracy. In this letter to Hansadutta, the majority vote and my opinion should be taken. When the majority opinion is present, my opinion will be yes or no. In most cases, it will be yes, unless it is grievously against our principles. So very much democracy was in the forefront for Prabhupada. That's how the GBC works. That's how many temples operate today. He also, Prabhupada defended democracy. That letter was in relation actually to the president of Bhaktivedanta Manor, the previous letter. So they had an election. This is in 74. And they elected this Madhavananda Das Adhikari. And here, Prabhupada defends democracy, another way to make unity amongst diversity. Regarding Madhavananda being the president, if he received the vote, why you have opposed, you must be impartial. Such an important statement. You must be impartial. My recommendation is that he must be the president. He has been chosen by the vote, and I am giving him the casting vote, and I am giving the casting vote for him. He is doing things very nicely there, so he must be the president. So here, when Hansadutta tried to undermine this democracy, Prabhupada defended democracy. But then, very interesting, if you see, this letter is from September 1974. So Madhavananda clearly was established as the president. And as one can imagine, there was a lot of personality conflict, perhaps, at Bhaktivedanta Manor. So now we find that Madhavananda writes to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada writes back intolerant of Madhavananda's criticism of Hansadutta. So here again, he's establishing unity and diversity by cutting down criticism. Prabhupada writes to Madhavananda, regarding Hansadutta, you cannot criticize him. Hansadutta is liquidating the debts. You were there, but you could not liquidate. But Hansadutta has come, and he is liquidating. We should utilize our talents without being envious of others. You should do your best, but you should not be envious of others. In material life, there is simply envy of others' progress. But in spiritual life, one encourages another. Oh, you are doing very nice. That is Radharani. She says, oh, here is a very nice devotee. Please, Krishna, you accept him. Such an instructive way that Prabhupada is using, as I say, this very wide palette to create amongst his very diverse disciples some sort of unity. Also, Prabhupada would mediate a compromise. This is a letter to Hansadutta. I don't think that Hayagriva, of course, was Prabhupada's first book editor. I don't think Hayagriva is at fault. He has not changed the meaning or the philosophy in any way. But if you like to use the original manuscript, then if it is possible, you can use it. So clearly, Hansadutta didn't like what the editing Hayagriva had done, which is also a contemporary problem. And Prabhupada says you can use the editing, you can use the original, it's fine. Don't make conflict. He also, Prabhupada supports independent pursuits, again to Hansadutta. You have expressed some new ideas to improve back to Godhead of the English, but I think there is no need to interrupt their way of thinking. Now you have a chance for your own edition, so do it nicely and according to your own ideas. So here we find that the English edition, the English version of Back to Godhead, was for whatever reason, was not inspiring or approved by Hansadutta. So Prabhupada says Hansadutta was doing the German edition of Back to Godhead. He spoke German. So Prabhupada says, do it the way you like it for your own edition. So we have two Back to Godheads, one according to the way the editors in English like it, and then Hansadutta can do it his own way. So we have independent pursuits. Also, there would sometimes be this bickering and pettiness. So in this instance, it was in a letter to Paranjana in 74, April. For the time being, work with Hansadutta and stop the bickering and conflicting camps. Here's another technique Prabhupada used for unity and diversity to accommodate others. So this letter goes back to 69. It was to Bhagavan and his wife at the time, Krishna Valmini. And he writes to them, I understand that Hansadutta works best when he can be in charge of the situation. So when he arrives, he may act as the temple president, and you shall be his assistants. Now again, we had the independent BTG pursuits. So here's another instance of independent pursuits. This is to Krishna Das. I'm also aware that sometimes Hansadutta will be very stubborn, but he is also doing something there. So why not let him go on? And you take charge of opening branches in those Northern European countries like Sweden, and that will be very much appreciated by me. So it's very similar to the back to Godhead situation. If you can't serve with Hansadutta, let him serve where he is, and you go, and there's so much other service to do. So we can see the diversity of Prabhupada's approach here. But then we find some very important aspect, and that is boundaries. That Prabhupada had boundaries beyond which he would not accommodate people. So we can look at that. We begin with the regulative principles. Again, this is to Hansadutta in 73. It was brought to my attention that our Sriman Hayagriva Das has become deviated from the 4 basic principles, which I have given to all my students for adherence to when they are first initiated. I do not know why he is living in such a way, but I feel that he must be brought back to the standard immediately. And then there were many times where Prabhupada had to be very strong with Hansadutta, which is one reason why we chose him. Here he acts in an unauthorized way. He receives this letter from Prabhupada in 71. I do not know how you could dare to do this without asking me or any other GBC members. And another one, this is 74, 3 years later. Why did you close Edinburgh without asking me? I made the GBC to give me relief, but if you do like this, then where is the relief? It is anxiety for me. This is the difficulty, that as soon as one gets power, he becomes whimsical and spoils everything. What can I do? When we open a temple, we are inviting Krishna. So you can't say to Krishna, go away. You have no feeling what are the ideals of a temple. Hare Krishna. So there were many other letters. There was even a telegram where Prabhupada also was very strong with Hansadutta, and we find these boundaries, these very clear boundaries that when Hansadutta crossed them, it was unmistakable, Prabhupada's response to that. So we see all these ways that he achieved unity and diversity through encouragement, establishing a relationship with the individual, coaching them, emphasizing the importance of the philosophy to elevate the consciousness, understanding their psychology. We saw Prabhupada said he was restless, sometimes he's disturbed, sometimes he's stubborn. He wanted to be in charge, and that led to Bhagavan and Krishna Bhomini. So he understood the mentality. It's also so important in successfully evoking this unity. He also, we saw, he encouraged discussion amongst the devotees. He emphasized democracy. And he cut down fault finding. We saw that with Madhavananda Prabhu when he was critical of Hansadutta. Prabhupada said, no, we should appreciate the service of others rather than fault finding. And we also saw to Paranjana that he didn't want this bickering, this petty, fault finding. Also, he established compromise when necessary, and he encouraged independent endeavors. Krishnadas, you go to Sweden, you have your German BTG, do with that what your vision is. He encouraged devotees to tolerate their differences. He made heartfelt appeals. What can I do? I established the GBC to alleviate my problems. My problems are increasing. And he didn't want factions. He wanted this unity and accommodated others. But also he had these boundaries that he enforced with such emphasis. I think this is so important. We can get diverted by the idea of unity, 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 and say, no, someone has gone beyond what is acceptable, and we must say so. This person has to be either rectified or the boundary has been crossed. So I think it's so important to also recognize that. So there's some final thoughts here. What is unity and diversity? when dissimilar individuals or concepts are harmonized based on an understanding that differences are natural and enriching. It can be achieved when Krishna is in the center. Srila Prabhupada once said that this verse describes the qualification we need for success, this famous verse. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. Yet, at the same time, when boundaries are crossed, we absolutely do not allow it with humility. So perhaps my time is up. I think we're supposed to leave time for questions and discussion, I hope, on some of these thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much. This is really an eye-opener, especially in this day and age when managing or even being a part of such a diverse society where we don't just have diversity in our backgrounds, but so much diversity within our opinions and what we think is the right way to do things, and how should Prabhupada harmonize and manage that while still making it look so easy. And sometimes we come to the conclusion not even possible, even at some of the higher levels. But at the same time, when we hear what you said, that no, this is just a matter of emphasizing the principles. So we have some comments and questions from the audience here. So Thomas Prabhu, he says, thank you so much, Vishaka Devi Dasi. What a powerful pedagogy to guide us through these principles through a particular person, and that person in relationship to Prabhupada, who is modeling unity in diversity. That was amazingly helpful and impactful. Thank you, Thomas Prabhu. Krishna Das Kaviraj Prabhu is asking a question. When Srila Prabhupada was personally present, we had an ultimate authority to approach. Presently, we have the situation where everyone believes they know what Srila Prabhupada is thinking, and therefore we have disunity. Therefore, how to proceed? It's a great question, Krishna Das Kaviraj Prabhu. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a marvelous question. Very, very relevant. And my own understanding is that Prabhupada expected each of us to become really immersed in his teachings, not just the teachings, but also the spirit in which he gave his teachings, the mood in which he gave his teachings, which means each one of us is responsible for strong daily sadhana, for consistent reading, for engaging in some sort of service according to our propensities and abilities. And really, I would say, devoting ourselves to this process in that way. And then when we discuss with like-minded people any particular question, we can express our understanding, again, with humility, but based on the Shastra, and hear from them, and really try to hear with an open mind, really try to see from their perspective. But I think as long as we're following the process sincerely, we can have some faith in our understanding. And especially if we absorb ourselves in Prabhupada's mood and spirit in which he developed the society and gave us this culture, then even though we may not agree with others' understanding, we can have some sort of solid basis on which to place our own understanding. I don't know if that was helpful at all. As you know, there's no easy answer to your question.
No, thank you. But that clarifies things a lot in terms of how to prioritize and how to think it through. We have another question. On the topic of democracy, when temples got officially registered as associations, they often had to get used to voting democratically, whereas before everything was ordered by the temple president. could you comment on this transition?
Yeah, at least I could speak from the point of view of what happens at Bhaktivedanta Manor. And what I've observed at Bhaktivedanta Manor, that you have a group of people who are qualified in whatever the topic might be, whether it's how to allocate finances or how to maintain the temple or whatever. So they sit together physically now, since the pandemic is over, and people express their understanding. And it's almost like there's a pot, a figurative pot in the middle of the room, and all these different understandings and opinions go into this pot. And then at the end of the session, a resolution comes out of the pot. It's a bit mystical, but somehow it goes on, and it appears to be successful. So it's not a vote per se, but it is somehow a democratic process through discussion, through churning, and through people sincerely wanting the best for the manner and the situation, the specific situation they're dealing with. Again, I don't know if that was at all helpful, but.
Yes, thank you. And I think that's always a dilemma on how to implement or inject some elements of democracy when it's these days not that clear on how to implement, say, the voting process, which was very clear in the past when all the members of the temple were residents of the temple, right? It's very clear who can vote and who cannot, or who should. But now it's the vast majority of temple devotees or the devotees in a community, what's their eligibility, because most of them do not live in the temple, and how long have they been coming, and how much weight does their vote carry, and so on. It's quite difficult to pull that off, but at least we can, infuse some democracy in it by opening it up for their voice to be heard. I think that's always a difficult thing to balance, whose voice carries how much weight in these kind of things. Thank you very much. Anybody else? If you have any questions, feel free. You can raise your hand, and we can also allow you to unmute yourself. This is a really interesting topic: how to implement, how Srila Prabhupada implemented, or harmonized unity and diversity. Let's see. I have a hand up. Anuttama Prabhu, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vishaka, for being with us. You mentioned in the response to the first question about the importance of understanding Prabhupada's mood and instructions. That also seems to be subject to some differences of opinion these days. Can you reflect a little bit more about understanding Prabhupada's mood and instructions, and perhaps in terms of how important of a role should that play for ISKCON, versus sometimes people present conflicting perspectives based on tradition or alternative readings of Shastra and things like that. If you could just share some thoughts on that topic for us.
Yeah, it's an important question. I think from the diversity of Prabhupada's approach to Hansadutta, we find such a range, from encouragement and coaching to being so forceful and strict, why have you done this? So you can see that his mood and the spirit of his teaching was very variegated according to circumstances. In each of the variegatedness, you can see it's directly Krishna conscious, but the variegatedness is astounding. So I think we have to incorporate that. I mean, there's one example I could say. It was actually from Washington, D.C., where you are, that when Prabhupada came there at one point, he was talking about becoming renounced, and how this becoming renounced, becoming celibate is so helpful for spiritual life. You can remain focused, fewer distractions, and so on. And one devotee said, even the women, Prabhupada? And Prabhupada said, yes, even the women. And it was such a shock, because we can't, and it must be hundreds of times he would speak how women should be married, they need to be protected, this and that. He just says something completely, even the women. yes, they should remain single. They should remain focused. And it's like astounding, just astounding to hear that. And yet, you can see it's, if a woman is qualified to do that, why force her to do something else? It's really very individual, and just to make a blanket statement without considering the individual can be actually very much a disservice to the individual and to our understanding of the flexibility, or you can say the wide palette that Prabhupada offered us.
Thank you.
Thank you. I had another question. There's this idea of, okay, we want to follow Srila Prabhupada as closely as possible. We all have our idea of what we think was Srila Prabhupada's mood, mission, and emphasis. And then we also have our idea of what is a principle and what is a detail that's adjustable, And so there's always the argument about, no, this is a principle. And then there's, no, this is actually a very adjustable, flexible detail that you can do away with it also. And you can see Srila Prabhupada was flexible on some of these other things. And then, we have sometimes cataclysmic arguments about some of these things. Perhaps you could speak to not so much that particular point about what's the detail, but how we can approach it to minimize the possibility of creating, too much friction and even rifts within groups and very high tensions. If there's any tips you can offer on perhaps more sattvic way of approaching these kind of differences in the aim of harmonizing our differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we have to pray for intelligence. When Prabhupada was approached about understanding details and principles, he said it takes some intelligence. So I think we need to pray for that intelligence amongst ourselves. And of course, that may or may not come, can't be forced. But we can also take inspiration, from, for instance, from the Bhagavatam, that Draupadi and Yudhishthira Maharaj was saying, don't kill Asvatthama. And Bhima was saying, kill Asvatthama. So what do we do? What do we do? So there was a way to resolve it, that he was killed, but he wasn't killed. I mean, who would think that would be possible? That you can kill somebody and not kill them. And yet Arjuna was blessed with that intelligence, how to do that. You kill him, but his heart is still beating. So I think that's the intelligence that we're going to be called upon now in ISKCON if we want to actually be successful in creating this unity and diversity. And if we're not blessed with that intelligence, we'll just find the diversity and the cataclysmic arguments increasing. So I think if we pray together, perhaps we can be successful. But I insist that there must be boundaries. There must be a point where you say, no, this is not acceptable. As we saw repeatedly Prabhupada did with Hansadutta.
Thank you so much for that clear advice. I think that praying for intelligence is something that we all need to probably do a lot more. We do have to move on to the next segment. So thank you once again to you, Mother Vishakha, for giving such deep insight into Srila Prabhupada's heart on this topic. And on behalf of our entire communications team, we'd like to thank you and for giving us your time and your inputs.
Also, we're not sure if Vishakha can stay, but if she can, she's more than welcome to do so. And there'll be additional Q&A after Vraja Vihari's session. So if you're available to stay for that, that would be great. Although we know you have many pressing duties to take care of as well.
Thank you for the kind invitation.
Yes. And we also have some more questions coming in. Please keep them coming in because we'll have quick opportunities to ask them later on as part of the bigger panel. So please keep them coming and we will try to accommodate them. So our next item today is by His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj. Welcome, Maharaj. His Holiness Haribol, welcome. His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj is the current chairman of the GBC Executive Committee, joining ISKCON in 1970 and taking initiation from Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj is a genuine Renaissance man, as we know it. A renowned Sanskrit and Bengali scholar. He has written and translated over 150 books. He personally met Indira Gandhi. He completed the construction of the Chennai temple. He stabilized the Tokyo center of ISKCON. He personally met, of course, the Prime Minister, and he's accomplished in many things: martial arts, Reiki healing, Carnatic Veena, and astrology, among so many other things. So without much more wasting time, I'd like to pass it off to His Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastatadesha Arane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I guess I'm supposed to give some sort of historical perspective on unity and diversity and Vedic culture and Gaudiya Sampradaya. First of all, we set one limit, and that is we call something astika or nastika. Astika means we accept a certain scriptures, the Vedas, the Puranas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, of course, the Itihasa, etc., Smriti Shastras, etc. So we have a list of works which we accept. If you accept those, we call you astika or theistic. So it's a very broad category. And if you don't accept that, you're nastika, atheistic, basically. You're excluded. So within that broad category, then we're going to have a lot of diversity. So what happened is that many people claim to, okay, we'll accept all these scriptures. We see that historically, we ended up with 6 different philosophical, theological groups. That is the logicians and the Karma Mimamsakas and the yogis, Patanjali yogis, Kannadas, Vaisheshika philosophy. And then finally, of course, we get the Vedanta. So we ended up with 6 groups within the broad category, not everybody accepting the Vedas. So there's diversity within the unity itself, but it was quite diverse so that they form separate groups. Now, when we come to Vedanta, then again, that is, we're accepting the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutras as authority. Should be okay. We're accepting, should be one group, but no. What happened is, again, we're getting diversity. So basically, we got 2 groups. We get Shankaracharya, and we get the Vaishnavas, starting with Ramanujacharya, who wrote the first big polemic against Mayavad philosophy. So that the Vedanta split into 2 groups, and then it began splitting further. It was first Vaishnavas against Mayavadis, but then the Vaishnavas began to develop different philosophies. So after Ramanujacharya, then we get Madhvacharya, who actually even condemns the philosophy of Ramanujacharya, even though they're both Vaishnavas. And they both have, a set of similar principles, except Vishnu is supreme, Bhakti is the process, Jivas are servants, world is real but full of illusion, etc. But philosophically, they had different types of arguments, so that we can say there is some sort of, let's say, ill feeling between the 2 groups, even though they're both Vaishnavas following Vedanta. And then later on, we get other groups. So basically, we end up with 4 groups: those following Ramanuja, those following Madhva, those following Nimbarka, and those following Vallabhacharya, and that group. So we ended up with 4 groups there. So among the Vaishnavas following Vedanta, we ended up with 4 varieties right there, 4 different groups. So again, variety within the so-called unity, but then because it was quite different, we could say that it was more diverse and less unity there, even though in one sense they're all Vaishnavas, so that's how they unify, but they're definitely different groups with different leaders, different acharyas, different methods of worship, etc. Then we come to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who claims to be coming in Madhva Sampradaya. So we're part of the 4 Sampradayas, but then our philosophy is different from Madhvacharya's philosophy. He has Dvaita philosophy. We have Achinta Bheda philosophy. No, different again. Our mode of worship is different. They worship Vishnu, we worship Krishna. We have a tendency to have emphasize raga bhakti, whereas they do everything according to Vidi bhakti. So okay, we get some differences. So because of we call ourselves part of the Madhva Sampradaya, but we also make a little distinction there by calling them the Gaudiya branch of the Madhva Sampradaya. So again, there's some variety within the one group we call the Madhva Sampradaya. So when Lord Chaitanya established his movement, then he gathered all sorts of people around him, and they all follow Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and everybody does Nam Sankirtan. That's the main process. They all take Bhagavatam as the main scripture, and Lord Chaitanya appointed Rupa, Sanatan, Raghunath, and others to Jiva Goswami to elucidate the theology and philosophy of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, which they did very nicely. But then we see within that group, there is some diversity also. For instance, diversity based on people or devotees. So we have Nityananda and his group, who were cowherd boys in Sakyarasa. We have Gadadhar and his group, and we have Srivas Pandit and his group, Dvaitacharya and his group. So they had their definite differences in one sense, because they had loyalty to a different leader, who were all following Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So there was some, we could say, difference within that unity right there, even in the very beginning stages. And that was allowed, it was accepted. Nobody criticized something for following Nityananda instead of Gadadhar or whatever like that. So there was no problem with that. It was not a theological difference. It was simply loyalty to persons. So there can be differences or diversity based upon person and the personality, though the philosophy is the same, the mood of worship may be slightly different, etc. So each one of these personalities was slightly different. If you read Chaitanya Charitamrita, then you'll see that Gadadhar was quite different from Nityananda Prabhu or Advaita Prabhu. So there are some differences there. We find different groups forming up right there. This later on, of course, after Lord Chaitanya's disappears, that those differences kind of remain because they established separate lineages. So we have Advaita's parampara coming down, Gadadhar's parampara, and Nityananda's parampara coming through Janava Devi, and then after that, and Virabhadra, her son. And we get these different groups, quite prominent, lineages of Diksha gurus coming out of that, which creates a little bit of difference right there again. Right? So though they're all identifying with Lord Chaitanya, they did have these differences right at the beginning, we can say, with Lord Chaitanya. Right after that, some different groups were there. Attempt, of course, is there for unity. Therefore, we identify Panchatattva. They're all given a special place. The 5 entities are given special places. 5 personalities are given a special place, and that creates a kind of unity there. Then we get that some other persons also popping up. So at the same time, we get, for instance, Narottam took initiation from Lokanath Goswami, who was in Vrindavan also, and then he started another sampradaya. So we get some variations there also. It was not just 5 personalities and 5 sampradayas. We get different groups coming up again, springing up after that as well. So that's based on personalities. And then we get guru lineages, many of which continued in family lines after that. So it was hereditary, father to son lines were established. So there was some, differences there based on loyalty to personalities. Now there is some, largely, of course, the philosophy is one, but there is a little room for differences. So for instance, we have Jiva Goswami as supporting Swakya Rasa over Parakya Rasa. He puts a great emphasis on that, and the Gopal Champu, there's a whole section there where all the gopis marry Krishna, and then they live happily ever after. So he's got a whole section there on that, which is a little astonishing when we're thinking about Parakya Rasa and the unmarried gopis, etc. So there was a little bit of difference there. And later on, Vishnu Chakravarti defended Parakya Rasa as being an eternal attribute also of the gopis. So there's a little bit of rasa difference, let's say, rasa difference there. Philosophically, of course, we could say not much difference. You can say, of course, we see that Sanatana Goswami wrote a commentary in the 10th canto. And later on, Vishwanath wrote a commentary. Jiva Goswami wrote a commentary on the 10th canto also. And they're all slightly different. So again, we see variety there. It's not significant philosophical difference, but difference in interpretation of meanings of verses. Even though we say, okay, it's one philosophy, absolute, still there's room for interpretation there. And so we have different commentaries. Later on, you'll find with Vishwanath and Baladev right next to each other, living at the same time, and Baladev taking Vishwanath as his Shiksha Guru. They both wrote commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, quite different meanings. So Vishwanath Chakravarti emphasizes the rasa aspect of the teachings. Baladev emphasizes more the Vedic aspect of the teachings. So we get two different interpretations of Bhagavad Gita. So in the same sampradaya, and even with persons living at the same time in Vrindavan, respecting each other, so that we can say there's a great tolerance of different ideas and different interpretations within our own sampradaya from that fact. So that's one thing. The Vaishnavas in general are very tolerant and mild. So we very rarely see the acharyas like Jiva Goswami or Rupa Goswami criticize anybody, really. They don't want to criticize. But there's, I think, one instance where Jiva Goswami, I think it's Jiva Goswami, makes a remark about Radha Vallabha's group. he kind of criticizes them. But basically, they stay away from criticizing the other Vaishnavas, or particularly the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. On the other hand, sometimes it becomes necessary. So there is that, I think Jai Gopal got excommunicated more or less for disobeying his guru. So that's explained in a letter, I think it's quoted in the Bhakti Ratnakar. But in general, the Gaudiyas are quite tolerant and they avoided criticizing others. So flexible, and within the Sampradaya, they allowed some variation. Another type of variation is that, yes, we say that Krishna is supreme and everybody agrees with that. He is Swayam Bhagavan. But yet we see Murari Gupta was worshipping Ramchandra. Anupam, he was also worshipping Ramchandra. And it was approved. They were not criticized for that also, in spite of the fact that everyone is like Radha Krishna, Madhurya Rasa is the highest. So they're quite different. Ramchandra, quite a different deity, a different mood, and Dasya, Aishwarya, Dasya, but nevertheless, those devotees were also accepted within the Sampradaya, even within Lord Chaitanya's own lifetime. Very acceptable. So the rasas were there. Another interesting point is that we're emphasizing, Radha Krishna, Madhurya Rasa, etc. So that's the main flow of our Sampradaya. But Lord Nityananda's followers were Sakas. They were cowherd boys. So they were in Sakya Rasa. And so actually there's a Sakya Rasa Sampradaya within our own Gaudiya Sampradaya. And Nayanananda, he wrote a small work, a little padati on Sakya Rasa, Raganuga Bhakti. If you want to practice Sakya Rasa as a cowherd boy, then he wrote a little padati for that. by which you can, practice your Raganuga Bhakti. So even though we're saying that, Radha Krishna is the highest, there was room for other rasas as well within our sampradaya. So again, there's some tolerances there, open-minded, etc. So in this way, there is some diversity within the unity going on. When we come to Bhaktivedanta Thakur, it becomes very interesting because not so much philosophical or rasa-wise or whatever, not difference there, but he began to explore different ways of communication. So not only did he write in Sanskrit and in Bengali, he also wrote in English, which is maybe a first for the Gaudiyas, I'm not sure, but his communication was quite different, revolutionary. And even then, not only wrote in English, but the way he expressed things was quite different. He would refer to modern philosophies, what he picked up from the British through educational system. He may refer to the Christians, etc. So he compared with these things, of course, and then he said he showed the superiority of Lord Chaitanya's philosophy, but he was willing to introduce other philosophies, etc. As well, because he was preaching at a time when many of the intellectual Bengalis, especially, were dabbling in all sorts of mixtures of religions. Let's combine the modern religions of Christianity with Upanishadic teachings or something like this, the Brahma Samaj, etc. So he introduced some new concepts and compared them, made some comparative studies with Lord Chaitanya's philosophy, ultimately coming to the proper conclusion, but nevertheless introducing new topics as well. And then he introduced new style also. So therefore, he even wrote like short stories and like a little novella, Prema Pradeep, to present the philosophy through a story. And of course, Jaiva Dharma is there, which more or less follows a story form also. So this was a new type of literary genre, so to speak, that he introduced in order to present Lord Chaitanya's philosophy in a very attractive way that people of that time would become attracted to. So he made some innovations within the sampradaya in that way. Very interesting. Then Bhaktivedanta Saraswati, of course, he continued with the innovative aspect within the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and he was very enthusiastic to print books. So he got all the old Chaitanya Charitamrita manuscripts, and then he published a critical edition of Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is not available, and very few people had seen, though they had heard about it. He was able to collect a manuscript and finally print the work with his commentary and Bhaktivedanta Thakur's commentary. So he was very enthusiastic at publicizing the Gaudiya literatures. And therefore, he even got a printing press and started printing these works out. So this, again, another innovation. He was willing to adapt to the modern world, whereas some conservatives, Goswamis, may not be so enthusiastic to do so at that time. So he was adopting modern methods. So this is, again, we can say a little bit of variety within the sampradaya. Of course, nowadays, we don't think this too remarkable because we know that innovation is very necessary with each generation because society keeps changing so often nowadays that in order to communicate, we have to use new methods, new language, new techniques for every generation. Otherwise, we will not attract people at all. So we have to keep abreast of modern techniques, etc. So this way, there's always some variety in how we're going to preach. Nevertheless, again, the unity is there in the sense that the basic theology and philosophy remains, because we do have our core scriptures like Bhagavatam with its commentaries by the acharyas, and Chaitanya Charitamrita and Bhagavad Gita with its commentaries. So we do have these core elements there to keep everything stable in spite of the innovations that take place. So Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur, of course, also made a very organized movement, which was previously not there with the Gaudiyas. It was basically family lines. So this is something, again, within the Gaudiya Sampradaya, he did something different, a little different. He established an organization, a legal entity, the Gaudiya Mat, in order to preach. Very good. So there, made a whole society. So that worked for him. He was the leader, but you see that after he disappeared, then gradually that movement broke up into groups. So the diversity overcame the unity of the Gaudiya Mat, mainly because of personalities. I say that Lord Chaitanya had his personalities. He have the Panchatattva and all these other acharyas there within the main group. But within the Gaudiya Mat, the personalities got too strong or independent, and therefore they just divided up that whole group, the Gaudiya Mat, into individual temples with individual gurus. So the individuality took over when the diversity remained without the unity within Bhaktisiddhanta's movement. So that's one thing that happened there. Of course, then we come to Srila Prabhupada, and again, he's put a great emphasis upon the unity aspect. Of course, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur did, but then that it was not enough, and therefore it broke into pieces. So Srila Prabhupada put more emphasis upon the unity aspect, seeing what happened with the Gaudiya Mat and how it did divide. So he put more emphasis on that unity aspect. However, again, there's always room for individuality and differences within the main group. Also, as Vishaka Devi pointed out, of course, there must be a limit on how individual can get without, breaking off completely. So yes, we do have to set limits, but there is some degree of tolerance in terms of, let's say, even philosophical variations, worship variations, persons who we want to respect, different groups, different gurus, different leaders, etc. So there is some variation there. So it's a little bit, we have to be very careful how we do that. How to keep the unity and therefore tolerate the variety without deviating from the main teachings and conduct of the Sampradaya. So there's a little bit of a, we can say we had to act very carefully when we tolerate and encourage the differences in order to not deviate completely from the main movement. We see that took place, of course, and therefore we get these Uppa Sampradayas. Very early, in fact, we'll get the Gauranga Nagaris coming out. Lochan Das Thakur is one of them, in fact, and just after Lord Chaitanya. And they emphasize Lord Chaitanya as Krishna, and they worship him like the enjoyer rather than the servant of Krishna. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur heavily criticizes that in his commentary on Chaitanya Charitamrita. So in other words, he rejected that completely. So we draw a line at a certain point of how far we tolerate, interpretation, etc. And at a certain point, they says, no, we don't accept that. This is not bona fide anymore. So we also have to set our limits, but within that, we do have some, would say, medium of toleration and whatever differences, etc. So I think my time's up, but anyway.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. We have some questions from devotees in the audience. That was really nectar, by the way. It's just a brilliant insight into this idea of diversity in the history of our Gaudiya Sampradaya. So Anupama Prabhu, you have a question. Would you like to ask it?
That's from Anupama.
Anupama with a P. That's correct. Yes. Or if not, I could read it out. Anupama Prabhu asks, how about diversity in ISKCON? Can different opinions, provided they are based on Srila Prabhupada and Shastra, be prevalent in our society? Should we have a GBC resolution for each issue?
Well, as I said, the Vaishnavas are very tolerant in general. So yes, obviously we have different loyalties to different leaders, etc. That's tolerated. we have different customs in different countries. Russia is a little different from America. America is different from Japan, etc. So the devotees are going to be a little bit different because of that. Chinese devotees a little bit different again. So we tolerate all that. As I said, there's a limit in terms of philosophy and conduct over which we cannot step. So that, of course, has to be defined properly by GBC and ISKCON. We have to define what are the limits, the ultimate limits. And then within that, we try to work things out. One thing that the GBC is working on at the moment is something called orders. Like we don't call it orders, but the Catholic Church has orders in order to keep the unity within the diversity, or the diversity within the unity. They didn't want the groups like the Trappists and the Dominicans to completely break off as a separate church. So they made an order within their group, and they have a certain loyalty, but not complete agreement on all issues. So in other words, there's a toleration limit, and then within that limit, others which are outside the limit, okay, start your own group, like that. So there's a little bit of discussion in ISKCON also about establishing something like orders, but we really have to work on that and see what are the limits of that, what are the advantages of that, what would be the disadvantages of that, and work it out very carefully.
Yes, thank you, Maharaj. We have a question from Jyoti Sundar. Go ahead, Jyoti Sundar Balaji. You can unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj. Please accept my humble obeisances. Maharaj, in Gopal Champu, as you mentioned, Jiva Goswami supports Swakya Rasa. In Ujjwala Nilamani, of course, both of them comment. So in that, Vishwanath Chakravarti supports Parakya Rasa. And he says, wherever Jiva Goswami supports Swakya Rasa, he says, this section is the part which Jiva Goswami later says is the opinion of others and is inconsistent. Even if the gopis are eternally related with Krishna, this fact does not rule out an eternal Parakya relationship. So Maharaj, so when there are contradictory literatures like this, how do we come to the right conclusion? Can you please explain, Maharaj? Thank you so much.
Well, as Vishnu Chakravarti contends, he's just saying that Parakya doesn't end, and it's only something in the material world. He says it's eternal. Whether it is a spiritual world is another thing, but at least the pastimes go on as long as the material world goes on. And then he also explains that even if the world doesn't go on, those pastimes will continue anyway, without a material world when pralaya takes place. So it's eternal in that sense. So in other words, it's not just a temporary thing within the material world that vanishes and then Krishna gets married to all the gopis. So he doesn't reject the Swakya, the married aspect, but he says both are there. So we can just take it as Krishna's got simultaneously Parakya and Swakya, how it is. So that's his Achintya Shakti.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maharaj. I think we can take one more. Vaidinath Prabhu, please go ahead. We have, before I ask Vaidinath Prabhu, maybe we just want to welcome some of our special guests. Mansi Ganga, maybe
we want to welcome, yes, thank you so much, Madan Gopal Prabhu. We are very honored that we have a wonderful esteemed guest today. We want to welcome Krishnadas Kaviraj Prabhu, who is chairman of the GBC deputies, Vaidinath Prabhu, who is amongst us. He's about to ask question. He's from Germany. Thank you so much for joining us. We're honored. And we also want to welcome Chitra Rupini Mataji from Italy. Thank you so much for joining the conference today. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Go ahead, Vaidinath Prabhu. Thank you.
Yes, Srila Prabhupada, in spite of so much tolerance, is not known as a very equal-minded person when what other traditions, Vedic gurus are concerned. He has always criticized demigod worshippers and Mayavadis, and also in practice he has been intolerant of many other gurus coming to the West from India. What is the reason for that?
Why he criticizes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said there are false gurus and like this.
He even criticizes Chaitanya Charva at the Gaudiya Mat. So yeah, sometimes criticism has to be done. We find even in Chaitanya Charva itself that Lord Chaitanya also criticizes the Mayavadis, whatever, like that. And as I said, Madhvacharya criticizes Ramanujacharya's philosophy also, like that. So sometimes, yes, our acharyas do that. I think that is to establish firmly faith in one's own sampradaya and one's own group. So to defend it from people who will criticize or whatever. So that's particularly the case with ISKCON. Prabhupada had a lot of opposition from different groups, even from the Gaudiya Mat. So therefore, he was very defensive in many ways. So he would fight back and criticize his groups. Now, of course, we're always against the Mayavadis and the Devata worshippers. So that's always there. At the same time, we do see, I think it is, Bhaktivedanta Thakur, when he talks about the aparads, okay, Devatas, don't worship Devatas, etc. Don't worship the, don't, adhere to karma mimamsa or anything. No, it is Vishnu actually that says this. So Vishnu says, but don't criticize the karma mimamsakas or their philosophy, because it is a Vedic path. The karma kanda is there. They may be misinterpreted or whatever, but these processes are meant for people who are not qualified for bhakti, and it was an authorized process in the past. So let them follow whatever. Of course, it's not practical in the modern age, so we can criticize them for that. But at least don't criticize the karma kanda, such as part of the Vedas, for people who don't have faith in bhakti, etc. So what you see is a little bit tolerant there of the, worshippers of Devatas or whatever like that, as being of a lesser category. On the other hand, then of course we'll find the opposite. Then generally we say don't worship the Devatas, don't worship Shiva as equal to Vishnu, etc. So we'll find both things: a tolerance and also some criticism in order to establish the, we could say, the faith in our own tenets.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's one more question from Radha Mohan Prabhu from the UK. So he asks, in the UK, for example, there are a number of organizations set up by devotees which have a different legal constitution, for example, but they ultimately serve ISKCON's interests, like the Oxford Center and the Avanti House School. So how best to deal with this?
Oh, well, the separate legal entities are there for particular reasons, let's say education. So they get some advantages by being separate, not being a religious organization or something like that. So even in India also, we have the same thing. We have separate groups for certain things like charity works and food for life, etc. Not ISKCON. That way, separate, their donations are separate, come under a separate category, etc. So legally, yeah, we should, of course, try to make sure that those members of that trust or whatever they are, the legal body, are loyal to ISKCON, so that there is some control in that sense. There may be even ISKCON members serving two roles, as is often the case in India, where the ISKCON members are also members of different trusts like that. So that keeps them kind of connected in spite of the fact they're being legally independent. So there may be legal independence, but ultimate, we can say, control in the sense that the members are loyal to ISKCON, etc., or they're actual ISKCON, they're officers of another ISKCON organization. So that's one way of keeping it under control. There is always the possibility, of course, they can become completely independent if those members of that trust become independent minded or whatever. So one has to be very careful of that.
Yes, thank you very much, Maharaj, for the insight. And thank you once again on behalf of the ISKCON communications team and this global conference for your valuable time. It has been most insightful. We're getting a lot of feedback also. Everyone's happy to hear from you on such a nice topic also of unity in diversity. We are most appreciative, Maharaj, and we hope you can stay on. We'll have some questions and answers a little bit later. So if you do have time, that'll be really appreciated during our panel section later on. So thank you very much. And yes, And dear devotees and guests, please stay on. Our next segments will be by His Grace Vraja Vihari Prabhu and on the unity and diversity cultural in ISKCON today. And there's going to be an interactive session after that, we will have the question and answer for all our panelists and all our speakers. And then that'll be followed by His Grace Anuttama Prabhu, who's going to talk about how communications it can be used as an enabler for unity in diversity. And so that's coming right up. So for now, please stay tuned. We'll be shortly starting back up again. We'll take a short break of a few minutes, about 10 minutes or so. So please watch the screen, leave yourselves connected here and enjoy a little bit of kirtan. And I want to thank all our team members who are putting this together, and Nandu Prabhu for running the technical to keep these things smoothly working. So thank you all once again. Please don't go too far away. We'll be right back. Hare Krishna.
কি জানি কি বলে তোমার ধামেতে হইনু শরণগত কি জানি কি বলে তোমার ধামেতে হইনু শরণাগত তুমি দয়াময় পতিত পাবন পতিত তারণে রত তুমি দয়াময় পতিত পাবন পতিত তারণে রত ভরসায় আমার এই মাত্র না তুমি তো করুণাময় ভরসায় আমার এই মাত্র না তুমি তো করুণাময় তব দয়া পাত্র নাহি মোর সম অবশ্য যাবে তব দয়া পাত্র নাহি মোর সম অবশ্য যাবে আমার তারিতে কাহার শপতি অবনি ভিতরে নাহি আমার তারিতে কাহার শপতি অবনি ভিতরে নাহি দয়াল ঠাকুর ঘোষণা তোমার অধম পামরে ত্রাহি ছাড়িয়া আসিয়াছি আমি তোমারও চরণে না সকল ছাড়িয়া আসিয়াছি আমি তোমারও চরণে না আমি নিত্য দাস তুমি পালয়িতা তুমি গোপ্তা জগন্নাথ আমি নিত্য দাস তুমি পালয়িতা তুমি গোপ্তা জগন্নাথ তোমার আমি মাত্র দাস আমারে তারিবে তুমি তোমার আমি মাত্র দাস আমারে তারিবে তুমি তোমার করিনু বড় আমার নাহি তো আমি তোমার করিনু বড় আমার নাহি তো আমি ভকতি বীণ কাঁদিয়া সর লয়েছে তোমার ভকতি বীণ কাঁদিয়া সর লয়েছে তোমার ক্ষমি অপরাধ নামে রুচি দিয়া পালন করো হে দাস ক্ষমি অপরাধ নামে রুচি দিয়া পালন করো হে দাস কি জানি কি বলে তোমার ধামেতে হইনু শরণাগত কি জানি কি বলে তোমার ধামেতে হইনু শরণাগত
Hare Krishna, and we are back online. Thank you very much for staying, dear devotees, for staying with us. So we will continue now. We just had two very fantastic presentations, one by Mother Vishakha and the other one by Holiness Bhanu Swami Maharaj. But we have now the next half of our seminar, which we will be featuring, of course, the same topic of unity in diversity. But before we go on to this next segment, I do want to welcome Her Grace Mother Rukmini. I believe she just joined us. So thank you, Mother Rukmini, for joining us. And of course, we also wanted to thank Her Grace Sati Devi Dasi, who is the chairperson of the Sabha, for joining us. So thank you once again for joining us on this very interesting and dynamic topic of unity in diversity. So our next presentation requires, presenter requires very little, introduction. His Grace Vraja Vihari Prabhu. Vraja Vihari Prabhu is well known around the world of ISKCON. He joined ISKCON in the 1970s in Detroit, Michigan, and he's got a master's from Eastern Mennonite University, and he's an expert in mediation. He works for the federal government as an ombudsperson for the Department of Interior. He is one of the co-founders of ISKCON Resolve, and helps us resolve all kinds of issues, differences, and so many potentially big problems, solving them, keeping them small problems. And of course, he's married to Mother Ananda Vrindavaneshwari, president of our DC temple, and they have a son, Gopinath Prabhu, who has also helped ISKCON in many, many ways in organizational development. Just a very dynamic, wonderful family. So with that, welcome, Vraja Vihari Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Panchakalpatru Yasha Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Okay. Put on your seatbelts.
Vraja Vihari, one point, our Spanish translators have requested the English speakers to go a little slower.
That's impossible for someone from New York. That's like asking you to avoid the paneer sabji. I'll try. All right, unity and diversity. So I thought just something about the term. In Hindi, there you see literally it's used. This term is used not just by ISKCON, believe it or not. From the Greeks, the Romans, the Taoists, the Native Americans all use the same concept. The Baha'is talk about it a lot, and the Mormons, because there are now 190 countries or something like that, they have a huge challenge and emphasis on unity and diversity. Prime Minister Modi is taught in recent programs, is talking about Ek Bharat, Shresth Bharat, one Bharat, great Bharat. And even the history of, if you just think of the word United States, the individual states, diversity, united. So it's a very common term. And just to give, a few ideas, examples of unity and diversity in orchestra, right? There's so many different parts of an orchestra, the different, the violins, the percussions, et cetera, but they all work together for one beautiful, hopefully beautiful sounding musical presentation. Or a car would be useless if it's just the parts. But when all the parts are put together nicely, of course, this looks like a pretty small car, it becomes, a Tesla or a Mercedes or whatever. And like I mentioned, the United States. So you're familiar, the stars in the top left are the 50 different states. The red and the white are the 13 original colonies, and it's one flag. Now, of course, it's also, this is a good example because this unity in diversity is being challenged probably more than ever in the 200 plus years of America in the last decade or so. Whether it will remain united is a huge question, and maybe diversity will turn it into something else. And of course, our own presentation of the social body, the four varnas, and how it is one body. So very important point in our presentation of Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada used the term in different ways, very from the existential point of view, everyone's an expansion of Krishna. This accounts for unity and diversity. And then Lord, as we heard from both Bhanu Swami and Vishaka Devi, achintya beta, abeta tattva. And Prabhupada would sometimes translate that as unity in diversity. And then an important one for this presentation, material nature means dissension and disagreement, especially in Kali Yuga. But for this Krishna consciousness movement its success will depend on agreement, even though there are varieties of engagement. And Vishaka Devi mentioned this point. If we keep Krishna in the center, then there will be agreement in varieties. That is called unity in diversity. But if we fight on account of diversity, then it is simply the material platform. Please try to maintain the philosophy of unity and diversity. And how many things did he say about that? He said that will make our movement successful. He didn't say so many things. He did say a number of things, but only a few. And one of them is maintaining unity and diversity. Otherwise, it's simply the material platform. And even with Mayavadi philosophers, they take one side only. They do not understand what is the difference. What is the different tastes, varieties? They cannot understand the varieties. Unity and diversity, they cannot understand. So even going as far as saying that, if we don't practice unity and diversity, we can be inching towards Mayavad philosophy. And perhaps one of my favorites is in the vase or vase, there is a variety of flowers, and that variety helps us better appreciate the idea of flowers. That is called unity in diversity. Our students come from different backgrounds, but because they are all in Krishna consciousness, they are unified. Okay, so those are some. Now, is it just, do we allow for unlimited diversity? This, both Vishaka and Devi and Maharaj mentioned, no, philosophically, we don't accept Mayavad. And this also came up from one of the questions. We don't accept Prabhupada as God. We don't accept Sahajiism or just materialism. And even managerially, we don't accept non-cooperation and not accepting of Prabhupada's authority structure. So it's not just unlimited diversity, and neither is it unity at all costs. Right? This famous letter to Karandar Prabhu, where Prabhupada says that we are training people to be independently thoughtful and avoiding bureaucracy. And if there is, once there is bureaucracy, the whole thing will be spoiled. There must be individual striving, right? And he said each center should remain independent. So there's boundaries within which unity and diversity, and Vishaka Devi especially emphasized this point that it's not just yato mat tato pat, just whatever. So, and Prabhupada was begging us, please try to maintain the philosophy of unity and diversity. That will make our movement successful. Okay, so what are the challenges? Some of the challenges. Well, here are a few. It's the nature of this world that there's diversity, right? There's 8,400,000 species of life. There's 400,000 different human beings. Oh my God, right? We all have our different purva samskars, our different impressions from previous lives, and all of those are different. We also have our manifest karma, our different bodies in this life. We come from different cultural and family upbringings. That can, and that could be, Malaysia and Canada, but it can also be across the street from you. Your families may have different upbringings, different social, economic backgrounds. So there's just this huge variety of culture. I mean, I lived in India for 21 years, and I feel I just scratched the surface of understanding the culture of that country after 21 years. The culture is so different, even in the same country. Southern hospitality, we talk about in America, and that's different than, anyway, there's so many differences. And then also for devotees, our early training in Krishna consciousness. So many people nowadays their training is not like it was in the 70s in the ashram with strict, sadhana and things like that. They're often trained as grihastas, and Anutama Prabhu mentioned that we're grihasta friendly in ISKCON communications. And as I said, ISKCON is in so many different countries. And what we'll talk about in a few minutes is the diversity coming from Prabhupada himself. So more about the challenges. This is an interesting concept called naive realism. And it's the, if you don't agree with me, if you don't see the world the way I see it, then there's really basically three choices. Okay, the first one's a little bit nicer, that you may have a different information. And in that case, if I provide you with the right information, then you'll agree with me, if you're reasonable and open-minded. Okay, that's actually a little liberal. Now, the next one is, if you don't agree with me, you're either lazy, irrational, or just unable to think clearly. You Egypt. Or the third one is that you're biased, and you're self-interested. You have a distorted view of reality. So the naive realism is often there in our consciousness. I prefer, instead of naive realism, maybe subjective realism, based on all of these points. We have, but it's the way we view others who don't agree with us that's really important here. And yeah, I think you get the idea. And this quote, so we often don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. We're looking through all these different lenses, all these different filters, like I mentioned, our socioeconomic background, our culture, or so many. We have all these filters going through our vision when we look at things. And therefore, we're asked to put on a different set of glasses, right? We're asked to look at things through the eyes of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. And here's an example. I don't know if you see the old lady on the left and the old man on the right, where the person playing the banjo/guitar on the right, and the person with the sombrero hat on the left. But we can be looking at the exact same thing and be seeing it differently. Policemen will often say that they interview 3 people who have viewed a car accident, and they get 3 different reports on what happened. Because we have our point of view, which literally means we're at one point and viewing things. So there's going to be differences. This is one of the challenges. And then the difference of the modes of material nature. In the mode of goodness, we tend to see the unity, right? But interestingly, in the mode of passion, it almost forces us to not focus on the unity, to focus on the diversity, to have a different opinion than someone else, and then in ignorance to think that someone else is an idiot, right? So the 2 lower modes of material nature ruin having a real concept of unity and diversity. It really takes a sattvic mindset to actually understand unity and diversity. Not only understand it, we can all understand it theoretically, but to believe in it and to practice it takes a large dose of sattva guna. Otherwise, the lower modes force us to not think in terms of unity and diversity. William Blake that thou, so this is, I like this because it's not just ISKCON, for God's sake, and it's not just 2022. He wrote this many years ago, that thou dost see. So what you see is my vision's greatest enemy. Thine loves of the same world that mine hates. You love what I hate. Thy heaven doors are my hell gates. Both read the Bible day and night, but thou readest black while I read white. So even looking at the same Shastra, and don't we see that a lot in our society also? But it's good. I think, misery loves company. So we're seeing here that this is not just, I do a lot of, I've been a consultant for the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, recently with the Unitarian Universalist Church, with the synagogue. And the same, it's not just ISKCON, it's not that we created this, it's very common. Very, very common. It's almost, it's the norm rather than the exception, something like this. And when I was just with the Universal Unitarians, they were at each other's throats, much, much worse than ISKCON. By the way, I would say that in the Christian organizations that I've worked with, they fight much more dirty than ISKCON devotees do. I really, I know you may not believe that, but I've seen much bigger conflicts, much dirtier kinds of arguments than we find in ISKCON. That makes you feel better. And Prabhupada would talk about this story about the two people fighting over which is better, the scissors or the knife, and even as the person is drowning in the river with his last burst of energy, he says, "Scissors!" And we're kind of like that, right? We often have, no, I will not change my mind. We dig in. And there's reasons for this. There's a book by a gentleman named Halberstadt, where he talks about church conflicts. And there's generally 5 major causes of conflicts just in the world, in organizations. Forget about faith-based, but just in general. Different information, I won't go into all the details, but different structures can cause conflict, values can cause conflict, different interests can cause conflict. In communications, talk about needs, interests, and concerns. But in faith-based organizations, there's an additional one that is much stronger than in other organizations, and that is our identity. Right? We really put, like for us as devotees, we put so much of our identity into being a devotee. We shave our heads, we change our friends, we change our eating habits, we change our dress, we change our worldview. We put a lot of our identity into being a devotee of Krishna and a member of ISKCON. And then someone else comes along who puts the same huge investment of identity, and they look at things differently than us. And that goes very deeply into the core of our false ego. Right? And we're really afraid to try to look at the world from their point of view, because that would mean giving up something that is so deep to us. So we often dig in our heels and say, no, I'm not changing my mind. Now, as I mentioned a little earlier, Prabhupada is also the source of diverse opinions. Look at this. This is about the moon, right? He says, Prabhupada said, yes, they didn't go to the moon. All laboratory work, that's all. They made it all up, Prabhupada, yes. And then he says, and practically we see they are going to the moon, but they cannot stay. Useless, going and coming. And then he says, with their advanced consciousness, human beings are naturally inclined to travel in outer space and to reach other planets, either by spaceships, mystic powers, or demigod worship. In the Vedic scriptures, it is said that one can reach other planets by any one of these 3 ways, including spaceships. Okay, but the most common is demigod worship. Maybe they are also diverting them to the deserted portion of the moon. They are also intelligent that these people are coming from earthly planet unauthorized. So let them diverted to the deserted portion. So you see, one topic, different times, different place, different circumstance. Prabhupada said differently. Another example, in our Krishna conscious movement, the tactic of dressing oneself like an ordinary karmi is necessary because everyone in the demoniac kingdom is against the Vaishnava teachings. As soon as they see a Vaishnava dressed in saffron garments with beads on his neck and tilak on his forehead, they are immediately irritated. Then he says, in our Krishna conscious movement, fashionable persons are taught to adopt one fashion, the dress of a Vaishnava with shaved head and tilak. Then he says, when they are dressed with saffron-colored cloth with tilak on their foreheads and beads in their hands and on their necks, they look exactly as if they come directly from Vaikuntha. Then Prabhupada once saw a picture of Balavanta Prabhu preaching during a political campaign. Balavanta wore a suit and tie, tilak and tulsi beads. His sika was trimmed and his hair was growing out. When Prabhupada saw the picture, he said, that is what we want, to preach in American dress. He said we should be known as American Krishnas. And my favorite one, because when I read this, and I was, just getting Bhagavad Gita for the first time, and I read this, I was really disturbed. And I almost like stopped reading the book. Because in the first chapter, in verse 28, Prabhupada writes in the purport that although it is not mentioned here, still one can easily imagine that not only were Arjuna's bodily limbs quivering and his mouth drying up, but he was also crying out of compassion. Such symptoms in Arjuna were not due to weakness, but due to soft-heartedness, a characteristic of a pure devotee of the Lord. And then the next purport, Arjuna's symptoms in this situation are out of material fear and the loss of life. All these are due to material conceptions of life. So it is important to remember, yes, Prabhupada will say different things at different times, different places, different circumstances, but he's never changing the principles, the Siddhanta. In the 6th chapter of the Nectar of Devotion, Prabhupada talks in the very beginning of the chapter about the difference between principles and details. That details can be adjusted, principles should never be adjusted. Okay, so how to address the challenges? I hope you're still awake. So what we want one goal of unity and diversity. We want unity without uniformity. Everyone has to be the same. And we want diversity without fragmentation. Right? And Thomas was just chatting with me and he reminded me of this. In the essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, charity. And he actually added bhakti there. And he and I were trying to remember where this came from. We were talking with Satchidananda Swami about this. But what a nice, this is how to deal with it. Now, of course, there's differences of opinion sometimes about what are essentials, what are non-essentials. The story of Priyavrata and Swayambhuva and Narada, Swayambhuva Manu and Narada Muni were having a disagreement. And, should he be a brahmachari? Should he take sannyas? Should he get married? And Lord Brahma came. There was a very nice discussion. And everyone, even Narada Muni, lost the argument. He was happy. He was satisfied. And we heard this, I think Vishaka Devi mentioned this, that, what should they do with Ashvatthama? And there was different opinions. Bhima was definitely of one opinion. Draupadi and Arjuna of a different opinion, and Krishna reconciled it. But what I tried to glean from these two examples is what do we learn? There was good communications. There was respectful communications. Right? They were very respectful in all the discussions. And by the way, I just threw this in there that the number one cause of conflict in the world is when we make incorrect assumptions about each other. And the number two cause is when we have unclear expectations, but that's for another time to go into details about that. And there were bona fide presentations. It was based on Shastra and moral standards. It wasn't outside the boundaries of diversity. And there was trust. There was great trust amongst the Pandavas and Draupadi and Krishna. There was great trust in Lord Brahma with Priyavrata, Swayambhuva Manu, and Narada, and that just made everything so easy. When there's lack of trust is like the oil that greases the machine that makes things run smoothly in Vaishnava dealings, in anyone's dealings, but in Vaishnava dealings as well. Oops, that's a little glitch. And then we learn from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, verse 32, this Vada Pravadatam Aham. And Krishna says that Vada, the natural conclusion, I am. And Prabhupada writes that amongst logicians, there are different kinds of arguments. Supporting one's arguments with evidence that also supports the opposing side is called jalpa. Merely trying to defeat someone is vitanda. And the actual conclusion is vada. It's the dispassion, or here, Gopi Pranadhana Prabhu did some research on this. And he says, Nyaya, logic, teaches various ways to reach conclusion. Okay. Krishna says, I am vada. Vada is debate carried out fairly according to standard rules without trying to force the establishment of a particular conclusion. So detached, just seeing what is out there, seeing what the great sadhu said, seeing what the Shastra says, detached from the conclusion. That's Krishna. Vitanda is quibbling or merely destructive argument in which one tries to defeat the opponent by any means possible, but does nothing substantial to positively prove one's own thesis. Have you ever seen that in ISKCON? Never, right? And jalpa is using various deceptive means to fool the opposition. That's sometimes like you quote half a sentence from Prabhupada. I saw this a lot in, what was that thing called? The Final Solution. That person, what was it, Krishna Kante Sai? Sometimes he would quote like half a sentence of Prabhupada, whereas the rest of the sentence proved the opposite. Like, you know, I mean, this is different, but like sense gratification is wonderful, Prabhupada said, if you're an animal. But you don't quote the if you're an animal. You just say, Prabhupada said it was wonderful. So vitanda and jalpa are forms of argument in which winning, not necessarily determining the truth, is the main consideration. So one way to establish unity and diversity is to seek vada, is to seek dispassionate, unattached, willing to look at all sides of a situation. Yeah. Then there's something called, I'll just give you a little taste for this. That's something called polarity management. And polarity management is basically about unity and diversity, that there's two polarities, like in this case, well, no, this is just an example, but you take that each side has some positive and some negatives. And so in polarity management, let's say we did tradition and innovation. So we would start with what are all the positive things about tradition, and we would list those. And then we would say, well, but what are some of the negative parts about tradition? And then we'd say, okay, what are some of the positive parts of innovation? And what are some of the negative parts of innovation? And then you try to emphasize the positive sides of the positive points of both, and try to avoid as much as possible the negative sides of both. And what happens well, I think this comes up in the next slide. Let me go to the next slide. So understanding begins when we can openly acknowledge the potential downside to either extreme. How many times do we do that? Many times we don't. We only talk about the upside of what we think is right. We don't talk about the potential downside. And we express appreciation for the positive aspects of the other side. And again, when we're affected by rajas and tamas, we don't do that. When we're jalpa and vitanda, we don't do that. When we're more in the mode of goodness and looking for vada, we do that. We can then come to appreciate each other's contribution to a healthy, broad vision. Okay, but we tend to lean towards one side or the other, and we tend to be overly, if not exclusively, focused on the positive aspects, like I just said. So this is individualism and team play. And so you can just see, a brief brainstorm of the positive parts of individualism, and then some of the downsides, and then the positive parts of team play, and then the downside. And what often happens is, and let's say this was in a tradition and innovation, an organization often starts with this, then experiences the downsides of tradition, then says, I have a great idea, we should go for innovation. Then they experience the beauty of innovation, and then they start experiencing the downside, and somebody says, I have a great idea, we should go back and really emphasize tradition. And in this way, there's like this infinity circle that happens. So sometimes we get caught in the tyranny of or, the belief that we cannot live with two seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time. That one can have change or stability, tradition or change with the times, but you can never have both. That's what sometimes we think. But as successful visionaries operate in what we call the genius of the and, the ability to embrace both extremes at the same time. Instead of choosing A and B, they figure out a way to have both A and B. Okay. This is interesting. We don't often think like this. The result of favoring one side. So a power struggle ensues to make one view prevalent. And this is so interesting. I found this. The irony is that should either side win, everyone loses. Like in ISKCON, if one side wins, actually ISKCON loses. And great breakthroughs can be made when we can see the polarity for what it is and deal with it in a mature way. Okay, so that's polarity management. I know I'm going through these slides quickly. I will have some time for questions, but there's different ways to look at how to successfully deal with the challenges of unity and diversity. And here's another one. I should have just did this one at a time. Sorry about that. But focus on the 98. What that means is we have a tendency to focus on the 2%, the 5% that we differ. And we forget what we call in conflict the superordinate goals. We all believe in kirtan. We all believe in the Bhagavatam. We all believe in prasadam. We all believe in deity worship. But no, we focus on that 2% that's different. Right? And the closer you are, the more you focus on that 2%. Right? Like we have, especially let's say, maybe not as much today, but in the past, all that conflict with the Gaudiya math, because they're so close to us. But, we don't fight so much with the Nimbarka Sampradaya, right? They're more distant, but the closer you get, right? Look in a family sometimes between husband and wife or brother and sister. And this is the second bullet point is really important. Generally, in almost all organizations, there's 10 to 15% on the extremes, and they're the most vocal. They're the ones who are constantly on social media, constantly, on, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens is the organization tends to focus on that 20 and 30% and neglects the 70% that is more moderate, more in the middle, more just want to chant Hare Krishna and, go back to Godhead. But the organization often focuses on the loud voices, on the extremes. And that really the organization often suffers. And this is approximate, but it's good to remember that you'll sometimes meet someone that you think is so unreasonable. And it's just purva samskars and karma. About 1/6 of the world, they aren't wired to think win-win. They just think, I have to win, you have to lose. And there's that 1/6 is a large part of the population. And then this should have been almost a separate slide, but one of the greatest ways to create real unity and diversity and have reasonable conversations about it is to be curious, not judgmental, not jump to conclusions, and throw out words, labeling people, oh, they are one of these and they're one of those, and not thinking like, so why is it so important for you? What is so important about this topic for you? That it's a great way to go through the world, to go through life in general, and especially in dealing with organizational conflicts, to be curious and not jump to conclusions. Right. And there's so many examples, right? In our Shastra, there's just so many examples of Parikshit Maharaj jumping to the conclusion that Samak Rishi was faking meditation. Parvati jumping to the conclusion that Chitraketu was making fun of her husband. The residents of Dwarka, thinking that Krishna, killed, was it Prasenna? Mother Sachi, jumping to the conclusion that Advaita Acharya, preached renunciation to her sons. You know, they again and again and again. The monkey warriors assuming that Vibhishana was just, you know, faking that he was surrendering to Lord Ram. Making those assumptions. So much better to be curious than judgmental. And to be good listeners, to listen to the other side of an argument, and to have that balance of what I call courage and consideration, to be willing to say your point strongly and also listen to the other side and be willing to adjust your viewpoint. And here Prabhupada's talking about college preaching in 1972, and he's saying that college students, yeah, they're a little puffed up, but that's okay, they deserve it. And that we have to have sharp minds. And what does sharp minds mean? He quotes Lord Chaitanya listening to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya for so many days. He quotes our Krishna listening patiently to Arjuna, even though Arjuna was speaking like a fool in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. And then he says, being always tolerant of others and appreciating their point of view. Now, appreciating their point of view, if I think Anuttama Rukmini would agree that at least in America in 1972, the average college student's point of view was drugs, sex, rock and roll, and Mayavad philosophy. But still, appreciating their point of views, it'll be easy matter for us to convince them to gradually join us. So being a good listener, we have, you know, Krishna gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And you know, when Krishna walked into the wrestling arena, right? He can be realized in different ways, as a thunderbolt, as Cupid personified, as their kinsman, as a strong ruler, as most loving child, as death personified, as the super soul, right? And this brings up an interesting point. So, were the yogis wrong that Krishna is a super soul? No, but was it complete? No. So sometimes we can be absolutely right, but not have the full picture. Right? We can quote Prabhupada on a topic and be absolutely right, but we're only presenting one side of it. So sometimes it's better not to be in a debate that you're right, you're wrong, but to say to the person, you're right. You're just not seeing the complete picture. Let's look at the complete picture of what Prabhupada said. I'm almost done if I'm going over time. And then if you study this, the beginning of the 22nd chapter of the 11th canto, I didn't quote the whole thing here, but in the beginning of it, Uddhava tells Krishna that there's so many different ways to see material nature, that there's 28 elements, there's 26, there's 13, there's 7, there's 9. And he says, which one's right? And Krishna says, therefore, no matter which of these thinkers is speaking, I accept their conclusions as authoritative, because a logical explanation can always be given for each of the different theories. So Krishna is saying, no, they all can be right. Why only one is right? This is actually earlier in that. He says, by interactions with my energies, different opinions arise, but for those who have fixed their intelligence on me and control their senses, differences of perceptions disappear. And consequently, the very cause of argument is removed. That was what Vishaka Devi was saying. We focus on Krishna, we have good sadhana, we have, you know, we pray to Krishna, and he gives us the intelligence, and the differences of perceptions disappear, and the cause of argument is removed. And Prabhupada also gave the Aesop's fable example that that if this person gave his sons one stick, they could break it easily, but when it was bunched up, it couldn't be broken. So how important unity is. And I'm almost done, last slide. But I once gave a talk at a Mennonite church, and before it wasn't the sermon, but the sermon, the person mentioned this, and I asked him for it afterwards, his notes, and he sent this. So unity isn't just anyway, let us suggest at the risk of being the bearer of bad news, that if all we do is help a church full of diverse people be friendly, get along with each other, and not fight very much, then we simply make church nothing more than a polite, neighborly social club. We settle for a cheap substitute for Christian community. So we should have good, robust discussions about unity and diversity, but they should be dialogues, not debates. They should be respectful. They should be searching for Vada. and not just say, no, we can't talk about it. We don't want to fight. No, let's get into it, but do it in the right way. We don't have to agree on everything, but we should be kind to one another. That's my presentation.
Yeah, I love that last slide, Prabhu. Keep calm. Yes, that's lovely. Thank you so much. A fantastic talk. Lots of appreciative comments coming on in the chat. Please, if you have any questions, please raise your hand for this particular talk. We have Vaidyanath Prabhu. Please go ahead, Vaidyanath Prabhu.
Yes, thank you, Vraj Vihari, for this very comprehensive presentation. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Vaidyanath Prabhu.
Yes, yes. One thing that raised my attention, you said we should focus on the majority. You said the 98%, and not the exceptions. But I know from my experience in ISKCON management, we mostly focus on the exceptions. We want to be the majority, we want to be 100%, but there will always be some people who don't go along, who have problems, who are in difficulty. So in management, we tend to focus on those to bring them into the majority. What is wrong about that, Vraj Vihari?
Thank you for that question. And it gives me an opportunity to clarify so that we don't jump to wrong assumptions. Not that we don't address it, but what happens sometimes is, actually, I think you were conflating two different things. The 98% was that we agree with so much, but we focus on what we disagree with. But the other one was the 10 to 15% on the extremes. And we give so much attention to them that we sometimes neglect the majority of people. So it's not that we don't give any attention to the, let's just use, for lack of a better words, the very vocal people, but we don't want to neglect the need, again, communications conference, the needs, the interests, and the concerns of the vast majority of ISKCON devotees. And so some people want to make whatever X issue the thing in ISKCON, and we're going to put it all over the internet, all over social media. And we might put so much energy into that instead of like devotee care, right? Making plans for, devotees as they get older, and programs for hearing and chanting, and what really most of the devotees really want to focus on. But no, we focus on the agenda of the people on the extreme. Now we certainly have to address that, but it's a question of leadership and emphasis, and we sometimes just focus on those things, and then the real essence of in ISKCON, the hearing, the chanting, the care for devotees, the Vaishnava Sangha gets put on the back burner, gets de-emphasized. So is that all right, Prabhuji?
Yes, okay, thank you for clarification. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. We have a question from Baladev Prabhu. Baladev Prabhu from Argentina. Would you like to ask your question?
And I'm so sorry, I spoke so fast.
Yes, so sorry. Okay, no problem, Prabhu. I want to bring up that in some religions, it's not a question, just my gratitude to you, Prabhu. Is beautiful, your exposition. But I just want to bring up that in some religions, like the Mormons, when they face a problem, they fast for a few days and absorb themselves in prayer to the Lord to give them the solution. I think that maybe it will be something we could adopt within ISKCON, or at least starting from one. I think that it would be a way to further enhance our dependence on Krishna.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I remember one year, Ravinda Sarup Prabhu for Kartik went to Govardhan and chanted, he was the chairman of the GBC, and he chanted 64 rounds a day for that same kind of mood. And by the way, please pray for his health. His health has been suffering recently.
Vraj Vihari, just to clarify for those of us in America, did Baladev Prabhu say we have to absorb ourselves in Breyer's ice cream? Is that what he said? I didn't. His accent was hard to understand that.
Vegan Breyer's ice cream.
After fasting. Yes, thank you, Prabhu. That was, yeah, that's a good point of reflection and this whole point of chanting 64 and doing something along those lines. Thank you, Baladev Prabhu. Great question. Anuttam Prabhu, go ahead. You had a question, comment?
Yeah, following the footsteps of some of our face-to-face communications conferences where we often don't shy away from controversy and the really tough things. First, I just want to really thank you, Vraja. It was a fantastic presentation. I hope you're going to do the same. Maybe this is your warm-up for the ILS, and I think you should make that presentation to the GBC, to the Sabha, to the, the whole, everybody, North American Council, RGB, was really, really phenomenal, especially now. We're a few days away from elections in North America, and everyone in the States, what kind of country we're going to have afterwards. But I'm just curious, two questions. Everything you said seems to make sense. And of course, there's a tendency, we all will think we're the reasonable ones. Those other guys, yeah, you're right. And you could even say my comments were like, yeah, those guys need to hear what you just said, not that I need to hear it. But in general, what if, like you said, there's 1/6 cannot see anything other than win-lose. And you mentioned that there's a certain percentage that, the extremes. You said we shouldn't cater to the extremes. What if extreme voices are dictating policy? They're swaying this, what might be considered the center. And what if, because communications people, I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, we tend to kind of go with the listen to the other side, acknowledge your own shortcomings, be flexible, look for win-win. And, it's a fact in the world. Sometimes while you're saying that, people punch in the face and don't necessarily follow the rules. And how do you respond? And though I'm sure you've dealt with it, how do you respond in those real life situations? Because, sometimes it happens. And frankly, it's quite discouraging. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, first is when you're choosing leaders, don't choose those 1/6 people. Have them focus on hearing and chanting, and and have them go out and smash the Mayavadis and the materialists and leave the devotees alone. But seriously, we should be selective about who are leaders and who are taking responsibility for caring for devotees, and try to choose people who are best equipped for that service. There's certainly other services for the people who are this 1/6. Of course they're devotees and they can do great service, but just leadership probably isn't one of them, because as we know from that letter from Prabhupada, he said, no, the leaders should come together in Mayapur every year and talk about unity and diversity. So if they can't talk about unity and diversity, they shouldn't be leaders. Simple. They should do other services and be leaders leaders in the sense that, we're talking about, who have responsibility for the care of other devotees and for the planning the outreach to the world. There's different, it's a really difficult question to, when you're dealing with a really unreasonable person, there's something called BIFF, B-I-F-F. And it is, especially if you ever gotten, an email, I've seen, we've all probably gotten emails that are like 5 pages long, and they just, so BIFF means your reply should be, B is brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And when you're dealing with really unreasonable people, it's the best thing is to be brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Thank you very much for your email. I will not be acting on the proposal that you're making, but I really appreciate you're taking the time to write this email, and I won't be, answering anymore. Have a nice day. Finished, like 5 sentences. There's a whole book you can read on BIFF. And that author has written a number of books on dealing with unreasonable people. Now, I know that these last 2 things probably don't really satisfy your query, because in your mind, you're probably thinking of people who already are in leadership positions. It's a little late. Or, and, you know, you reply Biff and they reply another 5 pages, something like that. But just so I just try to speak in generalities.
No, I think it's very helpful. And I think a big part of it is that we be aware of this, of these tendencies, both in ourselves and in others. I mean, again, in communications, you know, the first thing is, what am I doing to contribute to this problem? You know, we can't walk into some meeting with government or interfaith or academics or whatever, assuming that we've got it all figured out. And they're the ones that don't see the truth. We have to come from the perspective, how can I do better? And I think you've really talked about a culture that we need to create, we need to defend and promote within ISKCON, to have that type of broad-mindedness and to understand these tendencies that are there. So it is very helpful. And
I'll add that I found personally, not that I want to label people, you know, there's that saying, label jars, but not people, right? You know, cinnamon on the jar and, you know, whatever. But if I really feel I'm dealing with a person who really struggles to think win-win, then I don't try to enter into that kind of you know, even in conflict resolution. So you have 5 ways of dealing with any conflict. One is to avoid it, right? And we, you know, sometimes, by the way, none of these are good, none of these are bad. It depends on the situation. And in a minute, maybe I can try to put this on the screen if I'd find it. But you can avoid it. And sometimes avoiding is great, right? You ever get in a fight with a family member, you sleep on it, and the next day, not so bad, right? But avoiding is really bad if, you know, you're the leader, there's a big problem in your society and your organization, and you avoid it, and people say, what's Vraja Vihari doing about this, right? The next one is to accommodate. You let the other person get their way. And accommodating can be great sometimes. You know, we're kind of, in one sense, trained as disciples to be accommodating, right, to the orders of the spiritual master. So, like, the example I give, I was in Mayapur. I hadn't seen a devotee in 38 years. And I said, oh, let's take prasadam together. And I was really hoping to go to that pizza place on the top of, you know, that was run. But he really wanted to have some real authentic Bengali prasadam. So I said, yeah, we'll go take the Bengali prasadam, because the relationship was more important than the outcome. That's what accommodating is, when the relationship is more important than the outcome. And just, you know, let the other person have their way. So that can be great, because it really helps the relationship. Obviously, there can be times when accommodating is not the right choice, when a person has a bogus theory, or it's just not the right thing to do. And then the opposite of accommodating is compete, or, you know, my way or the highway. I got it right. I'm going to convince you. Is that bad or good? It depends. You know, a child's running into the street chasing a ball. You don't try to like be nice to them and make them feel good. You grab them by the scruff of the neck and you bring them back to safety. And the outcome is more important than the relationship, right? And we do have our chain of command. Anyone who works in the workforce has that, and even in ISKCON we have our chain of authority. And sometimes it's just like, hey, this is the way it is, right? If any of these, if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if your only default is always to compete, always to accommodate, if you always accommodate, you often become very resentful. If you always compete, you don't usually have too many friends. And then the last 2 are compromise and collaborate. And the classic example is, there's one orange left in the house. The brother and the sister are fighting over the last orange. And the parent comes along and says, okay, I don't want you to fight anymore, cut it in half. That's compromise. You each get half of what you wanted, and you don't get half of what you wanted, right? But if the mother or father would have said, why do you want the orange? And if the son said, well, I'm catching a cold and I need the vitamin C, I need the juice. And if the daughter said, well, I'm baking a cake for my fiance and I just need the peel. If you would have asked why, they each could have gotten 100%, and that's collaborating. Now, collaborating, is that good? Yeah, it's good. Is it always good? No. It takes time. Sometimes you don't have time to sit down and try to come up with a win-win solution, right? Is compromise good? Well, one good thing about compromise, it's quick. But like Madan Gopal Prabhu, how much does your temple cost to build in New Jersey?
About 7 million.
Okay, so Madan Gopal says, I want to build a temple for 7 million. And then other people in the congregation said, nah, let's not, we're fine as it is. And then they said, okay, let's compromise. Let's build a temple for 3.5 million. That would have been the word. It may sound, oh, very reasonable, we compromise, but you have a half-finished temple. So it would be the worst. So which one is better? Avoid, accommodate, compete, compromise, collaborate. It depends on the Desha Kalapatra, the time, the place, and the circumstance. But in this case, in Nanuttama Prabhu's question, okay, so collaborating is not going to probably work with this person. Now we have 4 other choices. And we can think of those 4 other choices and how to deal with them. I hope that's helpful, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. At this time, I'd like to request Her Grace Vishakha Devi to kindly join the panel. So we'll open up for further questions and make this discussion, continue it. So there you go. Thank you. There were some questions earlier that we had to kind of move over to this section. So I believe Krishnadas Kaviraj Prabhu, if you had any follow-up questions from the first segment, and if you would like to ask anything at this point to any of the panelists or, to Her Grace Vishakha Devi, you can do so right now.
I only had a question that I think Vraja Vihari already answered, is that it's sometimes said that a mind is like a parachute, it only works when it's open, and how to encourage openness. And you quoted from the Bhagavad Gita appropriately that the mode of goodness definitely helps one to have that more open-minded vision. Is there anything else that we can do that would encourage devotees to have this sort of open-minded, curious relationship with each other, so that they can get along, that they can work things out and like that?
Yes, it's a lot of it. I mentioned the word trust, or like in a mediation, one of my main goals in the beginning of mediation is just getting them to see the humanity of each other. See, sometimes I'm sure we see this in ISKCON. You look at a devotee and you just see an issue. Oh, they believe in such and such. We don't see the person behind it. A few years ago, we started the SGGS by asking each person to talk about how they came to Krishna consciousness. And so, and I even try to put people who are kind of like enemies a little bit in the same group, because then everyone's story of how they came to, you see their sincerity and how they gave up so much to serve Prabhupada. And so when we kind of see beyond devotees as issues, and as instead their humanity, their bhakti, if we can break that down even a little bit, it really, the parachute can open up a little bit, and maybe even enough to give you a safe landing, hopefully. But it's when we just see each other as their issue, and then we really dig in. But every one of us has this amazing how I came to Krishna consciousness story. Right? If you read Vishaka's book, it's so cool. And I can relate to it. We're from the same hometown, a small town in New York. And so when I was reading, I could relate to even the places that she was talking about and stuff, and how she came to Krishna consciousness. And then I just have then when I see Vishaka, I don't think temple president, the Bhaktivedanta Manor, or this or that. I just think of, just what an amazing soul she is and how she came to serve Prabhupada.
Well, thank you so much, Prabhu. Your practice in this field shows that you really have a mastery of this whole, this whole way of looking at things in order to get a good result. It's really amazing. Thank you so much.
My wife's on here and she might have a different opinion, but yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Unity and not diversity. We're not going to ask her opinion on that comment.
I will. So we had a question from Adi Kurma Prabhu earlier on for Mother Vishakha. If Adi Kurma Prabhu, would you like to ask your question, or perhaps I could read it? Let me see. Yeah, maybe I can just read it. So he'd asked, diversity, equity, and inclusion are important topics in the secular world now. What are your thoughts on how we can implement DEI in the same mood, from that particular corporate angle within ISKCON? Is that something we want to do? And how would we do it?
Who's the question for?
This is for Mother Vishakha.
Maybe I'll refer it to Vraja Vihari Prabhu. I think he may have more experience in that than I do.
Yeah, I deal with DEI. We add in the federal government DEIA, accessibility, for people who are handicapped. Actually, they don't use the word handicapped anymore. I think so the conflict that I was dealing with in the Unitarian Universalist Church recently was liberals versus ultra liberals. The whole Unitarian Universalist is totally, there's not one Unitarian I think that ever voted for Trump, but their conflict over wokeness, if that it means anything to people in Europe and other parts of the world, but just the idea that just by being born in a white body in America, you are representing the imperialistic, what's the other word? Colonialistic, worldview, and you're part of the problem practically just by, and they got in huge, like I said, much bigger than ISKCON arguments, huge arguments over this. And people leaving the church, leaving the congregation in throes and writing books about it, and it was a big thing because to be brief, it was kind of like the Martin Luther King versus the present day. The Martin Luther King was that we're all equal and don't treat me differently than others. And the present wokeness, not just DEIA, but even to some extent the BLM is. No, we have to make amends for all the past harms and not treat everyone equally, but give special treatment for those who have been mistreated. I think we need to look at DEI through a spiritual lens and through, like Maharaj, Chincha Beta, Beta Tattva, and not exclusively through a bodily concept of life. I think we want to be careful of that, that where we were born or what color our skin is or what gender we are. I think we want to be careful not to lose sight of kind of the Martin Luther King idea of that, no, we're all equal, like that. And at the same time, understand Prabhupada's example of the flowers and Vishaka Devi's point about democracy, that a diversity of opinions and not only opinions, but a diversity of experiences and a diversity of viewpoints can lead to much better decision making, and a decision that will apply to the variety that's within our society, right? Yeah, that's a simple. So it's a big thing in corporate America right now, corporate world, and to some extent, and I definitely experience this, it's sometimes just checking the box, right? Okay, we did our DEI training for the year. Okay, and it sometimes gets really angry and this and that. So we want to avoid that part of it, but we also want to keep, Prabhupada's idea about the flower vase, and also just making sure that, just like in the past, we took so long to hear the voices of our children. We heard voices of other, marginalized people in our society, and we want to be careful about that. So it's just finding that balance that I find sometimes the DEI that's found in the world today is either just check the box, or it's so extreme that it's not actually clear thinking or shastric. I hope that's helpful, and I'd be happy if I think you said that came from Adi Korma, if he had wanted to disagree or comment on that.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much. So the next question is from Anand Vrindavan Prabhu for Vishaka Prabhu. I'll insist that Vishaka Prabhu answer this one.
Hare Krishna. I was curious about the idea of voting, and we don't do voting for temple presidents or many things, except, of course, in a board meeting, but not congregational wise. And it seems voting can be very divisive and not bring along a lot of unity. So was it stopped at a certain point in ISKCON, and why?
I haven't heard of an official date that it stopped, and it was a bit unusual, even the occasion at the Manor in '74, where Prabhupada instructed the devotees to vote for a temple president. But as I was saying, at least at the Manor, it's not, we have many councils. You know, we have a patron council, we have the temple council, we have a senior management team, we have the trustees, and they're all set up that votes can happen to make decisions, but votes rarely do happen to make decisions. It's much more of a discussion, and from the discussion, there's a consensus of sorts, not a complete consensus, but a consensus of sorts that people pick up on and eventually agree to. So in a sense, it's more productive, I would say, than voting, because you don't have that kind of rigidity that would make for divisiveness and perhaps ill feelings. But through discussion, there's progress, I would say. Although we do vote for members of the different councils, we do vote for members of the trustee council, member of the patrons council, member of the temple council. But when we actually meet together as a body, then voting is infrequent. I don't know if that was at all helpful.
Anyway, I can follow up with you separately. But the community members vote for these devotees to hold those different positions, or the council itself votes for new members coming in and off?
The council itself votes.
Yeah, I was just more curious about this idea of temple residents or congregation voting, but it doesn't happen, and it didn't happen a lot, obviously, in ISKCON, and it still doesn't happen. Okay, thank you.
Could I just add one thing to that? Sorry. But I just wanted to, sometimes we think, sometimes we think that a vote is yes or no, or consensus means, but there's 5 different levels of consensus, and it's good to remember this sometimes, that you can still, one level is, yes, this is fantastic, it's better than sliced bread. I don't know if you can read this, it's kind of blurry, but okay, I accept the decision, I have some questions. The 3rd, I can live with it. I don't like it, but I'm not going to block it. And only the 5th one is, no, we got to talk about this more. So it's not so hard to reach consensus as we think. And votes don't always have to be just up and down.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anuttama Prabhu, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on Ananda Vrindavan's question. I know Ravindra Swarup Prabhu did some research on this, and he gave a talk and maybe a paper specifically, because like voting was mentioned, I believe, originally the direction and management. So there's been some question, well, wait, if this was something Prabhupada brought up, why aren't we doing it? Who changed it? All those kind of questions come up in the modern age. But, Ravinda had researched and found that Prabhupada had talked about that. He didn't put it in practice many times. And, for many, many years, he did different things and he wrote different things after that. So that might be something devotees, none or others have question about that, may want to look into or contact Ravindra Swarup, who, by the way, is doing much better. Vraja Vihari, thanks for mentioning.
Oh, great.
He was in the hospital for over a week, but as of a couple of days ago, we spoke with Shraddha, and he's doing very well. Went for a 2-mile walk the other day, so he's much better. Yeah.
Any other question? Oh, Vaidinath. Oh, Krishnadas Kaviraj Prabhu has a question, followed by Vaidinath Prabhu. Go ahead, Krishnadas Kaviraj Prabhu.
Yeah, we define ISKCON sometimes as a very sort of narrow, almost sectarian way of thinking. And then there's other times we define ISKCON as being this overarching principle that accepts a lot of different thoughts and a lot of like even some people say, hey, my ISKCON includes Ritvikism, you know, and it includes all devotees who are trying to, you know, reunite with Krishna. And so is it how do we define ISKCON? Who is defining ISKCON? And are we sometimes going down too narrow a road, you know, defining ISKCON, and how to keep it appropriately broad-minded, but at the same time, you know, where do we draw the lines? Do you understand my question? And I think Vraja Vihari Prabhu, if you could speak to that.
No, I was going to say Nuttama Prabhu should probably speak to that one.
Okay, whoever.
I just stepped out to grab a glass of water, so obviously Krishna didn't want me to answer that question because I didn't hear it. Sorry.
Well, you know, the vision of ISKCON, sometimes is it directed by the GBC? If it is it getting too narrow? Should ISKCON be defined as being something more broad that, you know, some people say, well, my ISKCON includes Ritviks because they want to distribute Prabhupada's books. They chant 16 rounds. They do everything devotees do. And I can relate, you know, to where they're coming from, you know, but I don't necessarily agree, but I can relate to it. And others say, no, this is absolutely outside of our, and so, you know, how we define ISKCON's boundaries is very important as to how we go forward, I think, with all the devotees on the planet.
I just give a little reflection on, I can't say anything definitive. I think both Vraja Vihari and Vishaka kind of spoke to that there needs to be tremendous amount of flexibility and diversity and uniqueness and individualism. And also there needs to be boundaries. As you said, there needs to be boundaries. I think one thing, an added part of this is sometimes we don't, where we forget, it's like, if you're not in, it doesn't mean like maybe some of our Christian friends, not all, but some of them may feel like either you're in or you're out. You know, like, you know, I was at an event the other night speaking with a young man who was a Catholic, and he was explaining to me about how purgatory is interpreted these days, that if a person is rotten their whole life, but on their deathbed, they say, God, I'm sorry, boom, he goes to purgatory. You know, there's some special forgiveness for that. But generally, if you don't on the deathbed have some kind of conversion, you go to hell forever. That's it. Forget it. That's their traditional thing. You know, so for us, it's not like if you're not a member of ISKCON, if you're a member of another Gaudiya group, or if you're some split, you know, there's no benefit from your chanting Hare Krishna. You know, we don't believe that, you know, every day practically I come across a reference to Prabhupada. Just saw one the other day in the first canto. He said, we don't care, you don't have to be Hindu or Christian or Muslim or Buddhist. He says, you have to be following the principles of religion. So I think if we start with that kind of a concept, I think we're a little more comfortable with saying boundaries. Like, we're happy, you know, you do what you like. Here's our boundary. We're very flexible and we have boundaries. And the fact that we have boundaries and you're a little outside of those boundaries doesn't mean we demonize you or you have no value. You have wonderful value. We're glad you are doing what you're doing. But at the same time, this is what we do. Once those boundaries are established, I think we have to have lots of flexibility on the inside. On certain issues, definitely have to have clear boundaries and be very careful not to demonize anybody outside those boundaries, but just say in a real humble mood, this is what we're doing, and we wish you all good with what you're doing. God bless you all. Quote Tiny Tim.
Tiny Tim.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Wonderful discussion. We will need to wrap up this panel at this point to move along to the next segment by His Grace Anuttama Prabhu. How communications can be an enabler for this concept of unity and diversity. So, Anutama Prabhu, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I was just going to kind of share some general reflections just for a few minutes about what we try to do within the communications ministry. And I think Vraja Vihari especially, but also other two speakers talked a lot about the need for communications in terms of exchanging of information and feelings and thoughts. Within the communications ministry, and there's many leaders here of our national team, I want to take a minute and recognize, of course, Madan Gopal and Manasi Ganga, we already mentioned. Nandu Prabhu from South Africa, who's our African communications minister, is here. He was also the technical coordinator behind the scenes. Baladev Prabhu from Argentina is in charge of communications in South America. Bhakta Prabhu, I'm not sure Bhakta is still with us, about 1 o'clock in the morning where he is. He started out with us. He's the communications director for Australasia. Mahaprabhu and Parabhakti in Europe. Yudhishthir Govinda Prabhu and Parijata in India. And then Alessia and Sadapriya Prabhu in Russia, and also Kumari Kunti in North America, working with Madan Gopal. So just to recognize their contributions. So just, in general, our concept is that, in communications, that we're trying to be servants of the whole society. Just talk about the ministry for a second. Servants of the whole society and helping to create a favorable environment for Krishna consciousness. We want to chant on the street. We want to distribute Prabhupada's books. We want to build temples. We want to be respected and have some positive impact on the society. So we're trying to create a favorable environment for that to happen. We recognize that there are other social forces. There's people, there's groups, there are organizations that have tremendous impact on what goes on in the society at large. We understand that ISKCON doesn't operate in a vacuum. We do operate. We're hearing Bhanu Swami spoke very beautifully about the history of our sampradaya and the broader Vedic tradition, and how particularly people in our line, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he mentioned a lot of emphasis, very much aware of what's going on in the society at large. He wrote in English. He used Christian terminology. He made friends with people of influential positions outside the traditional kind of Hindu Indian community. So these are the kind of role models that we really aspire to try to serve them. And we often give this example. It's like if you're gonna plant a garden, you can just go out in the spring and just throw a bunch of seeds in the ground and walk away and hope it grows. Or, as anyone that does gardening knows, the first thing you have to do is prepare the soil. You have to turn over the earth, maybe add some fertilizer, pull out a few weeds. Otherwise, just sticking the seeds in the ground doesn't work. So our efforts, a big part of our effort, is to try to create that more fertile environment. So then we use this term, key audiences. Who are the people out there or the organizations out there that can help create that favorable environment? In other words, if we have a positive win-win relationship with the government that allows us to get permits to build temples, we can have Rath Yatras, we get police protection when there's problems in our communities, etc. So we try to work with especially influential bodies like the media. I mentioned the government, our own congregations, with scholars, with other Hindu organizations, with interfaith leaders. And with this idea that years ago was maybe a little controversial, I think it still maybe isn't accepted everywhere. We are a minority in a very large world of diversity. I went the other night, I was in an event, they were honoring some people, their achievements in religious freedom. And, there's some people that have dedicated their lives in America and in other places around the world to defending the religious freedom of everyone, and we also get benefited. Sometimes they represent us in court and they assist us. So we are a small slice of a larger world. We are really the diversity, and we benefit from promoting unity within ourselves and within the larger society. And that requires a mood of humility and a mood of seeking cooperation, and especially focusing on communications. It's really kind of the essence or the ethos of what we do. And also within ISKCON communications to promote ISKCON, and within ISKCON a voice of moderation in the society. And I think this is something, probably, we don't use the word pride very often, but I think this is something that I feel a little proud of, the communications ethos, that we are trying to be very much a voice of moderation. And in that, I want to lift up someone who's become a hero for me in the last few weeks, whose name is Prajumna Prabhu, who was the president of the Leicester Temple in England. And without getting into all the details, basically there was some conflict, as often happens in this age. It was between some of the local Hindu community and Muslims, or let's say some Hindu youth and some Muslim youth. I think it started over, who won a cricket game or something like that. And one group marched in the other one's neighborhood and was, chanting things that were seen as aggressive. And then the other group marched in their neighborhood. Next thing you know, some temples, I think, have been defaced, vandalized, and the whole thing was escalating. And Prajumna Prabhu, because he was a proactive and broad-minded Krishna conscious leader, he had already established very good relationships with some of the local Hindu organizations, in addition, to ISKCON as the ISKCON representative. And when this whole thing came up, and he also, I believe, had relationships with some of the Muslim leaders in the area, or perhaps just this incident gave them impetus to go out and make those connections. So they got together with some local Hindu leaders and some local Muslim leaders, and they went out and made a shared statement together that this conflict between our communities, this does not represent us. This is not a religious belief. We've lived for decades together in Leicester. It's, I think, one of the most diverse, ethnically diverse communities in the whole of the UK. And we live together, and we're not going to let this incident divide us further. And he got heat from that. I saw some of the, I don't know, maybe hate mail is too strong, but very close to hate mail. As Vraja Vihari said, not from outside, but from inside, so to speak, people that you would think would identify with us. But he drew the attention and put ISKCON in the center stage of a voice of moderation, so much so that you're all aware, the newly, appointed or anointed King of England asked him to come, along with the local chief of police and a few other people, to come meet him. I think he was in Scotland, because the King of England wanted to meet with this leader who was speaking and saying these timely things, these courageous things, even in the face of major criticism from within his own broader religious tradition. And I think, again, that's what communications is all about. I've been a member for years of something called the Religion Communicators Council. And one of my gurus in that years ago was a Baptist minister. And he talked about how we have to be, as communicators, not just a mouthpiece for the organization, but we're really the sounding board. We're the ears for the organization. So we carry the message forward of our contributions to the world, of our principles, of our values, of the great contributions of our tradition. But we also want to be the ears. We want to hear from people. How are we doing? How can we do better? Also, that communications, and we say this in a humble way, we try to be the face of the organization in those places where ISKCON has no face. Oftentimes I go to events, I'm the only Hare Krishna person there. And it's kind of fun. You walk in and you got a dhoti and or a sari and tilak, and people looking at it like, who are you? It's like, wow, thank you, Krishna. There's a whole room of people. Maybe I can meet with 2 or 3 and hopefully give an impression that we're nice people, maybe sane people, may have some contribution to make. And I think that's an opportunity that's a wonderful one for all of us to take. And so to be the face of the organization, to be not just a mouthpiece, but the ears. And then also he mentioned, and this is a tough one sometimes, to be the conscience of the organization and not just cheerleaders. Oftentimes people frankly expect that the communications ministry, our role is to go out and be a cheerleader. Yeah, great. Look at us. We've done a wonderful job. But we're also meant to be the conscience. And a lot of younger people here, younger than me, may not remember that it was the ISKCON Communications Journal, of which Tattvavid Prabhu is here with us today. He is the editor of the recently rejuvenated ISKCON Communications Journal, a beautiful publication of our ministry, headed up by Mahaprabhu in Europe. We were the ones that published the first academic article about child abuse in ISKCON. And a lot of people within our society challenge us, why the heck are you doing that? But we did so because we were convinced, and this was largely credit of Shonaka Rishi Prabhu, who really pushed for this, that the best way to make ourselves better is to have an honest assessment of who we are, what we are, where we've done well, and where we need to improve. And I do remember that within a matter of hours of that being published and sent to what was called the Religion News Service, and ended up, the story was on the full page of the front page of the New York Times, which is not a shabby publication. You're getting a lot of attention globally. Big article about Hare Krishna movement and child abuse. But what was perhaps most significant was about the 5th or 6th paragraph there, and the writer of that wrote that how the Hare Krishnas were, I don't remember the term right now, but it was something like, this is it, quote, unusually candid, quote unquote, on how they were dealing with it. And because we had the courage and the conviction that we do have good principles, we do have good values, but we are living in a world that's full of so much contamination and polluted behavior, but we do want to try to be the best people we can, the best organization we can. We dealt with it as best possible in an open and honest way. Now, we make a lot of mistakes, but that's the ethos, that's the essence of what we try to do in communications. So in this mood of communications, we want to approach people, these key audiences, in a mood of humility and a mood of faith that we have something valuable to offer, but also in a mood of humility that, we are not God's answer. As Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I'm remembering now, spoke to a communications conference in Dallas years ago, and he was first going to the academy back as a scholar. And he said, commonly quoted, but he said it to ISKCON, we have to stop thinking we're God's gift to mankind. We don't have an exclusive truth of Krishna. We have deep and profound truths about God, but we don't have a monopoly. It's not that we can't learn from others. So when we approach these other people, to do so with a genuine mood of, we want to know what's important to you. What's important to you as government officials? We value that you're trying to do what you can to improve society. You also have flaws, we know that, but we value what contributions you make. So what's important to you? How can we find some points of shared interest? As Vraja Vihari was saying, how do we find win-win? That's our ethos. When we interact with the media, with the neighbors, how do we find win-win? And also to be open to asking, what are we doing well? How can we improve? And what is it that we're not understanding? We're ready to ask, what is it we're not understanding so that we can do better? And I was thinking, like with team building, they talk about forming, storming, norming, and then performing. It's take different types of leadership and different types of communications, but in general, that we want to promote openness and accountability, transparency, and our belief, and we may take it to the grave, but that's a source of strength. There are people who feel openness, transparency, and accountability, being willing to apologize when we make mistakes as individuals and as an organization. There are people, there are cultures that believe that's a weakness, but at least our ethos, as long as I'm doing this service, is just the opposite. And sometimes it's difficult. As individuals, we make mistakes. As a community, we definitely make mistakes. But it's our job to try to help ISKCON, and we try to do this, and we certainly make a lot of mistakes. So we're open for input, and then we really appreciate everybody coming here and participating in this, and also giving us your feedback, how we can improve. But we generally believe that Prabhupada wanted that community. Lord Chaitanya wants that community. We just saw in Vraja Vihari's slides, Lord Chaitanya sat in the slide it said 3 days. I was thinking it was longer, but 3 days listening to Mayavadi philosophy. And then when finally asked, well, you didn't seem to understand what I said. Then he said, well, actually, I think what you said is nonsense. But he sat there for 3 days and listened to that because he was so committed to trying to do what was necessary to help get the message across and exemplify for us the mood of compassion and integrity and accountability. So just a few thoughts on communications work. And again, my thanks to especially our 3 guests who came to speak to the group today. I'll mention anyone who's here, who's listening now or later on after we'll share this recording, that the ministry, the communication ministry, we need more help. We're like many ministries in ISKCON, we don't have a lot of funding. Our success is based on inspiration and hard work. We always have a need for writers. ISKCON News is one of the principal components of what we do. We need writers, we need editors, we need devotees who are interested to reach out and meet the local priest and meet the local editor of the paper, or talk to the people that are, social media influencers in your part of the world, to connect with them and to build relationships, to help us develop our, academic outreach, our government outreach. There's lots and lots to do. So I think maybe Managopal, you can put up, or somebody, Nandu, our website, if devotees can go and connect with the regional leaders of communications. And thanks for participating in today's conference, and please consider joining our team. We need additional help, and we appreciate anyone and everyone trying to be part of this mission to serve Srila Prabhupada. So those are my thoughts, Managopal Prabhu. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Anuttama Prabhu, for that very important highlighting that this communications ministry, and it's not just those who are members of the communications ministry or community. Every devotee is a communications devotee. We just have to recognize that, everyone is a devotee of the Lord. It's just sometimes we know it, we don't know it. So everyone is a communication devotee if they're Prabhupada's line. So thank you for highlighting that and bring it all together for us to see clearly. And of course, I just wanted to mention that if any devotees are interested, we are having our global in-person conference, international conference next year in Italy in May. It's a very beautiful, is that what I hear, in Italy at the time of the year. So if you're interested, please let us know. We'll be putting up some of the details on our ISKCON communication website. I've shared the link of the website on the chat as well. So please, if you're interested, let us know and join us. It's going to be multiple days towards the end of May, around May 26th. And it'll be very lovely if you could all join. We'll be covering lots of topics all day. So with that, I'd like to pass it on to Mansi Ganga, just to offer some more thanks.
Managopal, I'll also mention that in part of our effort to interact with the world in an appropriate give and take way, the communications ministry has famous days of interacting with the society around us. So when you come to Florence, you get to experience all kinds of things like monasteries and local culture, and we always take a day off, largely for kind of bonding among ourselves as members of a shared mission. And next year, as you mentioned, we're going to be in Florence, Italy. If you haven't been there, it's a great place to go. And it's a great excuse to come and spend some time there and learn a lot of important things how to serve Krishna. Thank you.
And to taste the Italian prasadam made by the Italian devotees, and to see one of the finest art museum of devotional art. I was blown away when I saw it this year for the first time, and it's really something you don't want to miss. And Florence is a historical center of art in the European world as well. Even globally, it's considered, one of the top art cities.
You're mentioning MOSA, the Museum of Spiritual Art, brought together by Mahaprabhu at the Florence Temple, and it's I think 8 or 10 huge room museum. Wonderful, beautiful experience of Krishna conscious culture.
It is something that you will not regret if you come to Italy for those few days. So please see if you can make it. Go ahead, Mansi.
Absolutely stunning. Yes, so I want to thank one more time our guest on behalf of ISKCON Communications. I would like to thank Her Grace Vishakha Devi Dasi, His Holiness Bhanu Swami, and His Grace Vraja Vihari Prabhu for bringing so much and much needed depth and dynamic practical wisdom. Thank you for your valuable time and insights. Hare Krishna.
Krishna. And I want to thank His Grace Anuttama Prabhu. Anuttama Prabhu, thank you, for all that you are doing for ISKCON communications around the world, dynamically leading, while also shepherding us, a diverse group of communication leaders from all over the various continents and regions around the world. We have so much diversity of opinion and backgrounds, but really showing the true unity and diversity. Every week we get together, and it's quite amazing, and we all look forward to it every week. We still haven't got tired of it, even though we've been doing it for so many years. It's awesome. And thank you, the entire ISKCON communications team. With special thanks to Nand Kishore Prabhu for coordinating the technology for this conference and the promotions, for Baladev Prabhu for coordinating the Spanish language translations, and for Ben Prabhu who did the simultaneous translation. And thank you to all of you, dear Vaishnavas, who joined this conference today. You are all communications devotees as representatives of Srila Prabhupada, and we appreciate all that you do for his divine mission. We will be sharing this video on the ISKCON News website shortly. Please do visit the site daily, ISKCON News. See what's happening around the world, in the world of ISKCON. And with that,
And even more so, please contribute an article on a daily basis. We not only have to read other people's work, but we'd love to read your articles.
yes, please. And it's not just news articles. You can offer editorials as well, and then we can be sharing those. So please feel free to take advantage of ISKCON News. It's you're members of ISKCON. This is really for you too, as an outlet as well. So please join us. Please see the two websites we mentioned: ISKCONcommunications.org. If you're interested in joining any of our teams, or even just to help or just ask more questions on how you can help, or even if you want things like media kits that you can just go off on your own, you can download those. If you want stock photography, video clips, it's all there on our ISKCONcommunications.org website. It's really beautifully done. We redid it last year. It's really fantastic, totally overhauled. So please join us, please support us in whatever way you can. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. All our contact information is there on ISKCONcommunication.org, our directory information.
I want to
And
go about one final appreciation. Radha Mohan Prabhu from the Bhaktivedanta Manor, coordinating the communications in the manor and with the rest of the UK, part of our global team. And I failed to recognize him when he joined us early on. So thank you, Radha Mohan Prabhu. He's also previously an opera singer, and he entertains us with some wonderful operatic, if that's the right word, whatever the right term would be, Krishna conscious music when we have our conferences. So forget Florence, just come to our conference just to hear Radha Mohan Prabhu inspire us with his beautiful voice.
thank you so much. And with that, we take your permission and we offer our obeisances to all of you. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyascha patitanam pavanebhyo all
Thank
glories
you, everyone.
Vaishnava.
Jai Shri
All
Prabhupada.
glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Srila
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai
Hari Bol. Hare
Jai
Krishna.
Hari Bol,
Hari
Hari
Bol.
Bol.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.